Putin was praying that the elite forces that North Korea sent could help him turn the tide in this war that's going horribly wrong for him. But alas, that was not the case. You see, the plan was simple. The 10,000 North Korean troops along with 40,000 Russian troops were supposed to push out the Ukrainian units that were occupying Russian territory in Kursk. The plan sounded good, at least on paper. In all likelihood, the Russian and North Korean forces far outnumbered the Ukrainian units. So they had the quantity advantage, but the quality is a different case. There's not much positive things I can say about the Russian soldiers. You see, an average Russian soldier has a lifespan of 3 days on the front lines in Ukraine. Kremlin is going through its soldiers so fast that some of these people on the front lines fighting for Russia are kids. Basically, they have no military experience whatsoever and they're just being thrown to the cannon fodder as fast as Russia can hire them. Then the North Korean troops. They are elite only in name. The last time North Korea fought a war was almost 60 years ago, and they have no clue what drones are, what they sound like, and how to counter them. They are well trained, but they are not battle hardened, and they have no clue how the modern battlefield operates. Then on the other side, we have the Ukrainian soldiers. They've been at war with Russia for more than a decade now. It's safe to say they know a thing or two about fighting modern wars. And that's exactly why this attack is going horribly wrong for Putin. You see, things got so bad between the North Korean and Russian troops that Russia is finally withdrawing North Korean troops from the Kursk region. That means that they were so bad, or the communication, the cooperation was so bad, that Putin didn't even want to use these North Korean troops as cannon fodder. I guess from everything we have learned about the North Korean troops so far in the battle, we should have seen this coming, but even I was shocked when I saw this news. Here, watch this clip yourself. But first, be sure to hit the like button down below as it helps us out tremendously when covering the war. Here's the clip.
These are the first images on the ground of the capture of North Korean troops by Ukraine. The soldier is injured, can hardly walk, but they spirit him away. Russian shelling intensifies to prevent capture. A wild prize pulled through their wires here from brutal fighting in Russia's Kursk region against a radicalized, near suicidal enemy, but one who'd never seen drones in war before. The Special Operations Forces who fought them told us.
Всі вони молоді, свіжі, витривалі. Але знову ж таки підготовлені до реалій війни, ну, в найкращому випадку 1980 року. Незважаючи на ті всі намагання закликати їх здатися в полон, вони будуть продовжувати йти в бій.
There's a unique challenge here. Ukraine wants to take captives, but the North Koreans seem to prefer to die. They shoot one here in caution. In the distressing images that follow, they pull one injured Korean's leg, then realize he has a grenade. He detonates under his chin. His last words were to scream North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's name, South Korean officials say.
Now, in a second, we'll go over some incidents that show why these North Korean troops were pulled off from the front lines. These include stuff like shooting at Russian soldiers, shooting at Chechen soldiers, so basically friendly fires. And we have also seen them just blowing up a grenade in their own territory. So they're surrounded by their own soldiers and North Korean soldiers just blow up a grenade. But before we get to all those stories, let's go over this report that first broke the news about North Koreans being pulled off from the Russian front lines. So this report came out just 2 days ago, January 30th. And it says North Korean soldiers who joined their Russian allies in battle against Ukrainian forces have been pulled off the front lines after suffering heavy casualties. Now, numbers do vary a little bit, but we have rough numbers of exactly how many North Koreans were sent to Russia. Anywhere from 10 to 12,000 is like the most agreed upon guess. Now, half of these soldiers are already gone from the battlefield, either died, captured, or wounded. They were disappearing very quickly, and that's why the article goes on to say the North Korean troops sent to bolster the Russian forces trying to push back a Ukrainian offensive inside Russia's border have not been seen at the front for about 2 weeks. Now, one of the reasons for this withdrawal and high number of casualties is disorganization in North Koreans' ranks and a lack of cohesion with Russian units that have caused North Koreans to basically become cannon fodder. But the situation got so bad that they couldn't even use them as cannon fodder, and it was better to just pull them off the front lines. In fact, one interesting tidbit that just came out recently from one of the Ukrainian news organization that shows how bad the situation in Kursk is for Vladimir Putin is the fact that since the start of this year, since January, which almost the whole month has passed, Putin has basically stopped mentioning Kursk. He's been mentioning negotiations a lot more in his public appearances and public speeches, and basically avoiding mentioning Kursk because he knows he cannot take it back before the negotiations start, and that's why he's just shifting the local focus away from that region. But anyways, continuing on this article, there was another interesting point made here that I want to share with you guys. Some American officials have said that the decision to pull North Korean troops off the front lines may not be a permanent one. It is possible, they said, that North Koreans could return after receiving additional training or after Russians come up with the new ways of deploying them to avoid such heavy casualties. Now let's move on to some stories or events that show exactly how bad the cooperation between the North Korean soldiers and Russian soldiers was on the front lines. First, we have a call that was intercepted that shows exactly how badly the Russians and North Koreans were getting along. They did not like each other, and Russians hated their North Korean counterparts, and that's exactly what this call shows. And this was even before they started fighting together. This was just North Koreans getting to the front line, going through the whole Russia and getting to Kursk. So let's watch this clip.
These pictures of North Koreans training in the far east of Russia have sparked a lot of speculation over Russia's plans in Ukraine. In intercepted communications from the front line, obtained by the Defense Intelligence of Ukraine, Russian soldiers can be heard complaining about their new allies. The North Koreans are codenamed the K Battalion.
Он этим, с кем-то батальона К. Я говорю, ну он как раз по поводу батальону К рассказывал. Я говорю, а кто получает, говорю, на них оружие, боеприпасы? Мы, говорю, сухпайки, говорю. А кто, говорю, получает? Я говорю, насколько я слышал, получают бригады. Бригады, типа вы получаете.
We can also hear them refer rudely to the North Koreans as the Chinese. The audio intercepts also reveal plans to have one interpreter and 3 senior officers for every 30 North Korean men. The Kremlin had initially dismissed allegations of North Korean troop deployments.
Then, as you can see from this headline, North Korean troops were basically open firing on the Russian units while they were fighting together. Imagine how hectic that would have been when you're trying to fight the Ukrainian soldiers who are battle-hardened, fighting for their country, and then you have someone behind you, someone in your own group, shooting at you. Battlefields are already complicated enough without having to worry about friendly fire and miscommunication because the other guy doesn't speak the same language as you. As you saw in the clip earlier, there was just one interpreter for every 30 soldiers. That's crazy. For every 30 person, there's one person translating, and on a battlefield where things are moving so fast, the drones are coming in, the missiles are coming in, I don't even know what else are flying, bullets are flying. You can't have 30 guys who don't speak the language and then one guy trying to manage it all and translate while also trying to stay alive. Another interesting consequence of this event, North Koreans firing on Russian soldiers, was that Chechen soldiers, which were part of the Russian battalions, Russian army, they refused to work together with North Koreans because we also had news of North Koreans basically shooting open firing on the Chechen soldiers, and they basically said from now on, we don't want to be working together with this group. We'd rather go in alone, or we'd rather not go in at all than work with North Koreans. So imagine that Russia, which is already having manpower issues because of how many people they're running through every single month. For the last few months, the casualty rates have been over 1,500 per day. And now they have to manage these even more complex scenario where one group doesn't want to work with another group. One of the groups they are sending in is open firing on another group, and the language issues and all that. I guess it kinda makes sense why they have such a high casualty rate. Next up, we have a Russian prisoner of war, so basically a Russian soldier who was captured by Ukrainians, explain how North Koreans are behaving on the battlefield. We can actually take away some interesting points from this segment, so let's watch it.
The first time I saw Koreans was at the Postoyali Dvory range. They're training separately from us. They don't have theory, but they have a lot of practice. They are always running and shooting a lot. They have a separate dining room, and their dugouts are the same as everyone else's, only located in a different place, on the other side of the headquarters. What else can I tell you about them? I saw them for the second time already on the front line, when they were fighting. There were many killed among them, many wounded, and even more of them alive. They are insolent, they can take away a rifle from an ordinary soldier and walk away. There were cases that took away weapons from Russian soldiers, just tore them up. Everyone contacted the higher leadership by radio, for them to solve the issue, for them to give up their weapons. What can I say about them? They're the first ones out, they attack, and then we get a foothold. They say they're all headless, that they don't care where they go or how they go. Then there's these insane guys. The first day, when we had to move to a point, we followed a group of Koreans. There were probably 4 or 5 of them. They're in the bushes, to be honest, you can see them down there. And then they shouted something from the bushes, and then opened fire at us with a machine gun. We didn't shoot, so we just stepped back, and they went forward on their own. There was also a case when one Korean shot 2, I think, Koreans in the legs with a machine gun. I know they eat well. However, still so, if they eat raw smoked sausage, the most delicious thing we ate in the dining room was buckwheat porridge. Yes, they are supplied with everything. They have ammunition and other weapons. They all have AK-12s. Rifles, machine guns, and everything is newer than ours. And we had only old AK-47s. We were sent to the shithole, probably one way. The first time I met Koreans was at the Postoyali Dvory range. I didn't think they were Koreans. I thought maybe some Buryats. We have enough of them in Russia too. To be honest, I was a little surprised that there are so many of them. I found out that there were about 800 of them. It just felt like it wasn't me, not them coming to me, but coming to them, because there were many more of them than there were Russians. We had practically no relations with them. They had a separate canteen, since we didn't cross paths with them in the canteen. They had separate dugouts on the other side completely. There were occasions when they dabbled with weapons at the range. I left a cartridge in the chamber and shot my own 3 legs at once with PKM, and once there was a case when an instructor was shot in the stomach. It was also a careless action on the part of a DPRK soldier. Careless action, and a bullet flew in. It was all right there. When we left for a combat mission, when we had already arrived, we again met Koreans. Koreans were in such large numbers. How many? About 300 maybe. We don't understand them in any way. How can you understand a person who speaks a language you don't understand? He shows us something, explains something, but we don't understand anything. To be honest, the farther away from the Koreans, the calmer it is. They shoot at quadricopters during the day, at FPV, at anything that flies. It doesn't matter if it's Russian or Ukrainian FPV. They even shoot them down. I believe so. It's demasking of Postians. Secondly, why are they still angry? A terrible Baba Yaga or even 2 come flying in, and all night long they're pounding those drones. One bombed out, leaves, the second one comes right in. The second one bombed out, the one that left comes in. And that's pretty much the whole night.
Now, all the while this is happening, things here in the US are changing for the worse for Russia and Vladimir Putin. You see, before Trump was elected, everyone in Russia believed that once Trump is in office, he would halt all the aid to Ukraine and Russia would have a walk in a park, walk straight into Kyiv and replace the government there and install their own puppet dictator. But things are not exactly playing out how Putin had hoped. In fact, many people in Trump's administration have said things, made comments that seem to be the exact opposite of what Putin wants. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has said that US will not abandon Ukraine. The special envoy to Ukraine, General Keith Kellogg, has said that we should sanction Russia until they come to the negotiating table. And worst of all, for Putin, President Donald Trump himself has said that the Russian economy is struggling very, very badly, and if Putin wants to survive this war, if he wants things to not get even worse, then he has to make a deal and make it soon. Otherwise, the US will slap Russia with taxes, tariffs, and sanctions. And that's his words, not mine. Now, with statements like this from the Trump administration and Trump himself, the media is also changing their tune when it comes to the Russia-Ukraine war. Here I have a clip from Sean Hannity of Fox News, who recently interviewed Zelensky. This specific interview had a very different tone compared to the earlier interview that Zelensky has given on Fox News. First of all, he hasn't been a common guest on Fox News before the election. So far, since the invasion started back in February 2022, Zelensky has only been interviewed 3 times in leading up to the election, and this is the 4th time, and the tone is vastly different, as you guys will see soon. Now, as you guys have heard before, we are neither a D or a R on this channel, but the fact that Zelensky was able to get in front of the Fox News audience is a big deal because Fox News is by far the biggest news channel, news organization in the US, and the fact that he was able to speak openly about his situation, Ukraine's situation, means that a lot more Americans see exactly what is happening and what this war is. On top of that, we had Sean Hannity describe this war as unprovoked, something that Putin launched himself, and called Putin a war criminal. All this kind of stuff, it's a good thing that more and more Americans are finding out exactly what's happening in Ukraine and how Russia started this war, this senseless war. And on top of that, America is one of the biggest backer. So if we can get American public to realize why we need to protect Ukraine, why we need to help Ukraine, then it's a much easier task for the administration and for Congress to pass aid to Ukraine. So let's watch this segment where I have cut out just some of the parts from the Sean Hannity section where he explains this war, and you guys hear it yourself, the tone.
Russia's unprovoked war of aggression in Ukraine continues to rage. Many are dying, infrastructure dying, but with President Trump now in office, all parties now seem to agree it is time for the violence to end. My fear for Ukraine, for your country, and you have fought valiantly, and I'm no fan of Vladimir Putin. I think he's evil, a murderer. I think all of this was unnecessary. All of it could have been negotiated from the beginning, but we are where we are, and I would like Ukraine to remain a country and not have all of its infrastructure destroyed in all of this. The president did say about Vladimir Putin, he said the following, that their economy is failing. He said, settle this, stop this ridiculous war. It's only going to get worse. If we don't make a deal in soon, I'll have no other choice but to put high levels of tariffs, taxes, and sanctions on anything being sold by Russia to the U.S. and other participating countries. Let's get this war, which never should have started, if I were president, over with, make a deal, no more lives should be lost. And I hope President Trump can assist with with Vladimir Putin. Not a fan of him. I think he never should have invaded Ukraine to begin with. I think your people have fought valiantly.
Now, just to put the clip you just saw in contrast with how Fox News was covering the war just a year ago, they were calling it because a NATO expansion is what triggered the war. It wasn't Russia's senseless invasion that triggered the war, it was NATO expansion. Even though NATO doesn't expand, countries come into NATO. And they called another reason behind war was the Ukrainian corruption. Now, of course, we are not denying on this channel that Ukraine doesn't have corruption. And the whole reason we find out that the corruption in Ukraine is because the Ukrainian government, Zelensky himself, is cracking down on corruption. It is a corrupt country. It was a very corrupt country before this war started, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't help them. That doesn't mean the aid shouldn't go in. In fact, Zelensky cracking down on corruption is the reason how we're finding some of these stories where some of the officials are diverting a very, very small percentage of the aid to their personal pockets. But they are getting caught, they are getting punished, and justice is being served. And if corruption was a fair reason to not help a country, we would have to look to Russia, because Russia is far more corrupt than Ukraine ever was and ever is. Clearly, all this is not good news for Putin, and as we'll cover soon, he's changing his tune himself. He's coming out and saying, oh, he's open to negotiating with Trump. He doesn't want to negotiate with Zelensky because Zelensky is not a legitimate leader, but all this is happening as West is putting more and more pressure on Putin, as Trump administration is putting more and more pressure. But before we get to Putin's clip, I do want to share one of the answers Zelensky gave during his interview on the Fox News. So let's listen to that.
Я впевнений, якщо президент Трамп захоче, він зможе примусити Путіна.
President Trump has the will to force Putin to come to peace, he can do it. And if the US considers pressure on Putin involving other countries, Global South and China, I'm sure that an agreement can be made. So they make that pressure as well, pressure on Putin, I'm sure. And I know that President Trump is not very happy about NATO. We talked with him about, but we need broader guarantees of security. If there are no joint guarantees, I believe that guarantees from Europe alone will never be enough. We talked about this before. The Europeans understand that without guarantees of security from the United States, from President Trump, it will not be enough. Putin is not afraid of Europe. Unfortunately, that is so. And so we need such guarantees of security. And we talked about the mistake that Ukraine made at the time back because of that pressure from the United States and the Russian Federation when we gave away the nuclear weapons we had in exchange for that Budapest memorandum, which gave us nothing. That Budapest memorandum was just a piece of paper, same as the Minsk agreements. That memorandum, nobody really gave us support. Such agreements may have not enough value.
Now, as you guys know, we have covered on this channel earlier too that Trump is ready to slap more sanctions on Russia if they don't want to come to the negotiating table. In fact, he has gone as far as to say, and I quote, that Ukraine is ready to negotiate. It's Putin who doesn't want to negotiate, all the while the Russian economy is collapsing, okay? Now, words like that definitely scare Putin because it's not very far from General Kellogg's plan where he says basically that if Russia doesn't want to come to the table, we'll arm Ukraine to the teeth. Now, Russia is already struggling, losing more than 1,500 men every single day and gaining a little bit of ground, all the while they only have 20% of Ukraine after 10 years of fighting. Now, if US were to arm Ukraine to the teeth, that would mean Ukraine can destroy the Russian army because Russia is fighting with Soviet-era weapons, all the while Ukraine is still fighting with hand-me-down weapons, basically the older weapons that West didn't need, older weapons that West was going to replace anyway, so they gave to Ukraine. Now, imagine how well Ukraine would fight if they had the most modern, the strongest weapon that West has to offer, the Western technologies have to offer. So that's something Putin cannot fight against, and that's why he's changing his own tune. He's ready to negotiate as long as it's with President Trump. Here, watch that clip.
You can negotiate with anyone, but because of his illegitimacy, he has no right to sign anything. But if you want to take part in the negotiations, I will select such people who would like to have a negotiation with him. The question is about final signing documents, and this is a very serious issue which should guarantee security for both Ukraine and Russia for a long-term historical perspective. There can't be any mistake, no roughness here. Everything should have been defined in accordance with the Constitution of Ukraine by the President of Ukraine. Even under military conditions, he has no right to extend his powers. He only has rights on extension of power through representative bodies, only rather than his country's parliament. If there is a desire to negotiate and find compromise decisions, let anyone go for it. We will strive what suits us best, but regarding signing of documents, here of course everything should be so that lawyers confirm the illegitimacy of those people who will have to sign these life sentences.
Now, as you guys know, we're independent creators over here. We cover news completely self-funded. It's funded by YouTube ads, by you guys hitting the like button and watching our videos. But sometimes it is a struggle to get monetized on YouTube, and that's why we would greatly appreciate your support if you can take a second and maybe become a member down below. Now, this is only if you're able to, but it costs as little as $5 and it would greatly help us out in our effort to stay independent and keep you guys informed on the world news. So thank you so much, and if you're interested, you can become a member by clicking the join button down below.
Ukraine has done it again. In just 48 hours, they've managed to take out entire battalions of North Korean troops fighting alongside Russia in the Kursk region. That's right, entire battalions, hundreds of soldiers at a time, have been wiped out. It's a staggering development and clearly shows just how far ahead Ukraine is in this war when it comes to strategy and technology. On January 4th, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky shared details from a briefing by the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. The report emphasized the intense fighting near the village of Makhnivka, where Ukrainian forces inflicted severe casualties on their enemies. According to the briefing, during the first few days of January, battles in the area were fierce, but by the end of it, Russia had lost up to a battalion of North Korean infantry and Russian paratroopers. Zelensky also took a moment to commend Ukrainian units for their exceptional professionalism and effectiveness. He gave a special shout-out to the Special Operations Forces and the 80th Separate Air Assault Brigade for their remarkable contributions. Just so you know, this is the same elite group that spearheaded Ukraine's first surprise attack into the Kursk region last year, where they captured hundreds of miles of Russian territory and also took dozens of Russian soldiers as prisoners of war. What's even more fascinating is that just 2 days before the Kursk operation began, some of the soldiers from the 80th Separate Air Assault Brigade secretly crossed the Russian border, gathered intel, and sent it back to their command. Then they stayed hidden and waited for the action to begin. This kind of strategic brilliance is why this brigade and just overall Ukrainian units are so effective. You see, it's no secret that North Korean troops deployed in Russia are experiencing devastating losses. While the estimates of their casualties differ, all reports consistently indicate alarmingly high numbers. According to South Korea's National Intelligence Service, approximately 3,000 North Korean soldiers have been killed or severely wounded since their deployment began. Ukrainian President Zelensky has put the figure even higher, estimating around 4,000 North Korean casualties, including both killed and injured. Meanwhile, U.S. officials have reported that over 1,000 North Koreans were killed in the final weeks of December alone. Either way, these are staggering losses for a force of only 10,000 to 12,000 troops. But here's the shocking part. Despite these massive casualties, nothing is changing on the Russian side. Instead of learning from the battlefield, adapting their strategies, or better training their reinforcements, Putin seems to be doubling down on his failed tactics. Rather than addressing the root causes of these failures, unofficial reports suggest that he's prepared to throw even more money at Kim Jong-un, maybe another 200 million or even more, for a fresh batch of North Korean soldiers. And I'm not kidding. Several reports suggest that Kim Jong-un might already be preparing another group of innocent and clueless soldiers to send straight into Russia's meat grinder. But wait, before we get any further into this video, let's take a moment to break down something important. I want to explain how a North Korean battalion operates and their age-old strategies, which, interestingly enough, are pretty similar to the Russians. Once we've got that covered, we'll compare their approach to how the Ukrainians handle things. And to wrap it all up, I'll share a great example that shows why smart strategy has always been more effective than just throwing sheer manpower at the front lines, something history has proven time and time again. First, like always, remember to hit that like button on the video below. It helps me out tremendously. So first things first, North Korea boasts one of the largest militaries in the world, with approximately 1.3 million active duty personnel and millions more in reserve. A North Korean battalion typically consists of 300 to 500 soldiers, depending on its mission and resources. This is just an estimate and aligns with the structure observed during the Korean War, where battalions were organized into 3 rifle companies and a headquarters company, each contributing to the total battalion strength. Each company usually has 8,120 soldiers, sometimes even more, and then this is further broken into platoons and squads. These are the backbone of the battalion, responsible for direct combat. There's also a command unit at the top, and of course, political officers embedded throughout. These officers aren't there to lead or strategize. They're there to ensure ideological loyalty, making sure every soldier remembers their ultimate duty to serve the regime. That's a major red flag right there. Imagine being on the front lines of a modern battlefield, where decisions need to be quick and flexible. But but instead, you're stuck with a rigid hierarchy where even the smallest decision requires layers of approval. It's a setup designed to maintain control, not win wars. Now let's talk about training, or should I say, the lack of it. You see, North Korean soldiers are conditioned in a very narrow and rigid way. They're trained to perform manual labor and have only the most basic combat skills. Beyond that, their diet consists of moldy cabbage and an endless stream of propaganda. Every day, they're forced to spend hours memorizing quotes from Kim Jong-un or practicing absolute blind obedience to orders, as if the food wasn't less and bad enough. This kind of mental strain completely drains their ability to think on their feet. Instead, they're reduced to functioning like empty mechanical cans of meat. North Korean soldiers are tough, no doubt about it. They can endure harsh conditions, march for miles, and survive on minimal food, but toughness doesn't win wars. Training does. Turns out that even North Korea's elite forces are still trained, using the same outdated tactics they relied on decades ago. The same old static trench warfare, human wave attacks, and mass artillery barrages. Most of their drills are physical, like marching in formation, hand-to-hand combat, and handling outdated rifles. These are skills that might have been useful in, say, the 1950s, but in today's world, where drones can take you out from miles away, this kind of training is practically useless. Even during the Korean War, North Korea had the full support of the Soviet Union, which played a huge role in shaping its military strategy and operations. The tactics they used weren't particularly sophisticated, but they were brutally effective at first. Overwhelm the enemy with sheer manpower, rely on static defenses, and rain down relentless artillery barrages. These methods worked in the early days of the war, catching South Korean and US forces completely off guard. Within weeks, North Korean troops managed to push deep into the south. If that sounds familiar, it's because Russia did something eerily similar in Ukraine. They used overwhelming force and numbers to throw Ukraine off balance and, at one point, came dangerously close to capturing Kyiv. But for both North Korea back then and Russia now, their early successes quickly turned into catastrophic failures. Take one of their most infamous tactics, the human wave attack. The concept is simple. Send wave after wave of troops to overwhelm the enemy physically and mentally. On paper, it sounds effective, but in reality, it's nothing short of a massacre. For every tiny stretch of ground gained, the attacking forces would lose hundreds, sometimes even thousands, of soldiers. But here's the thing, both South Korea during the Korean War and Ukraine today weren't just sitting ducks. They adapted. By the later stages of these conflicts, the human wave tactic became so predictable that it was practically suicidal. Defenders would dig in, set up their lines, and wait for the charge. When it inevitably came, they would mow down the attackers in droves. It was brutal, but it was effective. Another key tactic used by North Korea during the Korean War was static trench warfare. They constructed extensive networks of trenches, bunkers, and minefields, creating what seemed on paper to be impenetrable fortifications. These defenses were designed to slow down advancing forces, exhaust their resources, and inflict heavy casualties over time. At first glance, it appeared to be a sound strategy, offering a sense of security to North Korean forces. But this very same thing turned into a glaring weakness. You see, once enemy forces identified vulnerabilities in these fortifications or managed to encircle them, they became deadly traps. US forces, leveraging their air superiority, turned these trenches into graveyards with relentless bombing campaigns. At the same time, South Korean troops executed precision ground assaults, targeting weak points in the defensive lines and exploiting gaps to devastating effect. In comparison, South Korea adopted a far more flexible and adaptive approach. Instead of relying on static defenses, they focused on mobility, strategic withdrawals, and counterattacks. When faced with overwhelming North Korean offensives, South Korean forces often pulled back to regroup, drawing the enemy into overextended positions. Once the North Koreans were exposed, they countered with coordinated ground assaults supported by American air power. This approach allowed South Korea to regain ground and turn the tide of the war. Fast forward to today, and we see a similar story unfolding in Ukraine. While trenches do play a role in Ukraine's defense, they aren't the cornerstone of their strategy. Instead, Ukrainian forces use a combination of hit-and-run tactics, highly coordinated counteroffensives, and modern technology, like drones and precision-guided weaponry, to outmaneuver Russian troops. Another glaring weakness for North Korea was and still is its rigid top-down command structure. You see, during the war, orders were issued from the highest levels, and field commanders had little to no autonomy to adapt to changing battlefield conditions. While this kind of centralized control worked for simple operations, like coordinating mass attacks, it became a major liability during complex and fast-changing battles. A perfect example of this weakness is the Battle of the Pusan Perimeter. At first, North Korean forces held a significant advantage, pushing South Korean and US troops into a narrow corner of the Korean peninsula. Their strategy of overwhelming the enemy seemed to be working. However, everything changed when the US launched a daring counteroffensive at Incheon. This bold amphibious assault disrupted North Korean supply lines and flanked their forces. Despite the battlefield shifting rapidly, North Korean commanders stubbornly clung to their original orders, refusing to adapt to the new reality unfolding around them. Their rigid chain of command left no room for quick decision-making, which proved disastrous during the US counteroffensive at Incheon. By the time they realized what was happening, the damage had already been done. Their forces were surrounded, their supply lines were severed, and what could have been a fighting retreat turned into a complete collapse. This inability to adapt didn't just cost them the battle, it changed the entire course of the war. Now fast forward to modern times, and we see history repeating itself. Look at what happened during the events in Kursk. Russian commanders reportedly had intelligence suggesting that Ukraine might launch an attack. But instead of taking the warning seriously, they dismissed the possibility outright. They didn't believe Ukraine had the capability, or perhaps the audacity, to strike into Russian territory. This arrogance left key border areas poorly secured, and when the attack finally came, it caught them completely off guard. What's worse, instead of acting quickly and decisively, the Russian commanders panicked. They were so entrenched in their rigid hierarchy that they refused to make decisions on their own. They waited for orders from above, leaving critical moments of response wasted. By the time those orders came, the damage was done. Several dozens of Russian soldiers gave up and surrendered, and the rest ended up retreating. Now coming back to the Korean War, let's see how South Korea and the US handled things differently. What set them apart wasn't just better equipment or air superiority, it was their adaptability. For instance, during the Battle of the Pusan Perimeter, North Korean forces initially held a significant advantage. However, the tide turned dramatically with the US counteroffensive at Incheon. As I said, North Korean commanders were slow to adapt, and they stuck to their original orders. By the time they finally reacted, it was too late. This same inability to adjust is likely why, just recently, an entire North Korean battalion was wiped out in only 2 days. But what about the Ukrainian side? Well, let's take a closer look at Ukraine's 413th Raid Separate Battalion, one of the first units to join the Kursk operation. Their role in the operation offers a glimpse into how Ukraine has managed to maintain its edge on the battlefield. First, it's important to note that the Kursk operation was planned and executed with extraordinary secrecy. Heavy equipment and military units were moved to the border with Russia in the Sumy region, camouflaged among forests to avoid detection. The operation was so covert that it wasn't even hinted at in the media or by military analysts until the offensive was already underway. For the first few days after the breakthrough, there was complete silence from Ukrainian officials. Only later did the military begin to reveal how the operation unfolded in August. At this point, the fighting in the Kursk region has been ongoing for 6 months. Despite all of Russia's efforts, including the deployment of thousands of North Korean reinforcements, they've only managed to recapture around 40 to 60% of their own territory. The lack of significant progress speaks volumes about Ukraine's operational competence. Now, the success of Ukraine's operations in Kursk isn't just about one battalion. While the 413th Raid Separate Battalion of Unmanned Aerial Systems plays a vital role, they're part of a much larger, coordinated effort. Dozens of units are working together, sharing intelligence, providing support, and operating like a well-oiled machine. Unlike the rigid, isolated strategies seen on the Russian side, Ukraine's forces demonstrate a high level of coordination and adaptability, functioning as a single, cohesive entity. Upon reaching their deployment point, the unmanned team of the 413th Raid Separate Battalion wastes no time getting to work. They quickly unload their equipment, set up antennas, and prepare their drones for action. One of their key tools is a large, airplane-type drone designed for long-range surveillance. This drone is the backbone of their operations. tasked with identifying concentrations of enemy personnel, equipment, and high-priority Russian targets. In addition to reconnaissance, the team plays a crucial role in adjusting the fire for other Ukrainian units, ensuring strikes are precise and effective. For instance, one of their most notable successes was detecting and facilitating the destruction of a Russian S-400 missile defense system located north of Kursk. If this system had gone unnoticed, it could have posed a catastrophic threat to Ukrainian troops operating in the region. The team's mobility adds another layer of effectiveness. Operating out of a mini office set up in a vehicle, they can quickly relocate to avoid detection by Russian forces, maintaining their element of surprise. But the team doesn't work alone. For example, during one operation, their long-range drone not only confirmed the location of the S-400 system, but also detected a Russian super camera and a jeep equipped with an electronic warfare device. The drone also tracked the movements of Russian troops. All of this intelligence, including precise coordinates, was relayed to other Ukrainian units, who systematically neutralized the threats one by one. Thanks to this single long-range drone, the 413th Battalion identified over 20 Russian electronic warfare systems, including the Borisogledsk R-330 Zhytel and the rare Krasuka 4. These systems are critical components of Russia's electronic warfare capabilities, and their removal significantly disrupted Russian operations in the region. But this is just one piece of Ukraine's broader strategy. Apart from this, one of Ukraine's most effective strategies in this war has been ensuring the survivability of its command posts. In modern warfare, where every unit relies on others to achieve the best possible outcomes, command posts are the backbone of operations. Drone units need ground troops to eliminate electronic warfare systems. Ground troops rely on artillery and heavy machinery to handle tanks, large groups of soldiers, and air support. Artillery, in turn, depends on drones for accurate targeting and reconnaissance. It's a complex, interconnected system where every part plays a critical role, but it all ultimately depends on the command posts. Command posts are the nerve centers of the battlefield. They're where decisions are made, where a clear and timely picture of the situation is developed, and where plans are adjusted to match the changing dynamics of war. Without a functioning command post, the entire chain of operations falls apart. This is where Ukraine has excelled, demonstrating incredible effectiveness in maintaining its command post survivability, something Russia and North Korea have struggled with significantly. But Russia is fully aware of the importance of command posts and has made consistent efforts to target them. Ukrainian command posts are under constant threat from unmanned aircraft systems, indirect fire, and electronic warfare attacks. However, despite these relentless attempts, Russia has largely failed to neutralize them, thanks to Ukraine's meticulous planning and adaptability. For a command post to survive in large-scale combat operations, planners must take into account an intricate web of factors and implement new tactics, techniques, and procedures for its design, placement, and camouflage. It's not as simple as just hiding or fortifying a location. There's a lot that goes into this decision. For instance, mission, enemy, terrain, and weather, troops and support available, time available, civil considerations, and more. All these factors work together to determine the command post's location and survivability. Ukrainian command posts are typically located about 2 to 5 kilometers from the front line, with their combat trains, command posts positioned further back, approximately 10 kilometers from the action. Further these posts are from the front line, the better they're protected from detection and indirect fire. Underground facilities, such as basements, offer the best protection. They not only shield personnel and equipment, but also mask electromagnetic emissions, reducing the chances of enemy detection without requiring extensive additional measures. When basements aren't available, Ukrainian forces take matters into their own hands by constructing underground earth fortifications. To further enhance protection and secrecy, Ukrainian units make creative use of existing infrastructure. In urban areas, tunnels and sewers are often repurposed to create hidden passages and establish secure lines of communication. In clusters of buildings, soldiers punch holes between walls, creating concealed routes that allow them to move undetected and mislead the enemy. However, many battles occur in rural areas where infrastructure is limited. In these scenarios, Ukraine maximizes the available resources by dispersing forces across surrounding buildings, forests, and terrain. Forested areas in particular offer dense vegetation that provides natural camouflage and limits the enemy's ability to locate and attack command positions. To secure forest-based command posts, Ukrainian troops dig fighting positions to protect personnel and equipment. These positions are designed with both functionality and safety in mind. They are dug as deep as possible and feature an L-shaped entrance, which helps block direct fire and shrapnel. Inside, they construct an inner wall for additional protection and reinforce the roof to shield against potential artillery or airstrikes. All of these measures are typically enough to throw off Russian detection efforts, but the Ukrainians aren't taking any chances. To further mislead the enemy, they employ clever deception tactics and set up convincing dummies. One of their most effective tricks is using radio signal emitter decoys that mimic the operations of repeater systems, tricking Russian forces into believing they've located a real command post. Another clever method involves deploying mobile teams that imitate command and staff radio transmissions. These teams deliberately broadcast signals that draw Russian attention, making them think they've pinpointed a critical command center. In response, Russian forces often deploy UAVs and UAS drones for intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. One of the key things these drones look for is the telltale Starlink antenna system, which is essential for Ukrainian communications. Here's where it gets even more interesting. The Ukrainians use fake Starlink setups to bait the Russians. They might take an object painted white, wrap it in a white tablecloth, or even use chalk to give it the appearance of a Starlink antenna. They'll place this decoy near a strategically chosen area, laying out fake cables to make it look like a legitimate connection. Other deception tactics involve simulating normal, everyday activity to make fake sites seem authentic. For example, they'll hang pants on a line, drape a coat over the back of a chair, scatter cigarette butts, candy wrappers, or other signs of life around the location. Sometimes they'll even tow broken equipment or faulty vehicles to the decoy site, setting them up to look like operational and valuable assets. These little details make the decoys incredibly convincing. Once Russian forces are convinced they've found a key Ukrainian site, they unleash a barrage of attacks. Hundreds of artillery shells, suicide drones, and even missiles are sent to obliterate the fake target. From the Russian perspective, it looks like a major victory. They believe they've struck a crucial Ukrainian command post. In reality, all they've done is waste time, ammunition, and resources on a ghost. Meanwhile, Ukraine uses this diversion to its advantage. As Russian forces waste their energy on decoys, Ukrainian units focus on real operations elsewhere, making meaningful progress on the battlefield. This not only drains Russian resources, but also boosts Ukrainian morale as they continue to outsmart and outmaneuver their adversaries. It's a brilliant display of how strategic deception can turn an enemy's aggression into a self-inflicted setback. Earlier in this video, I mentioned that I'd share a great historical example to show you why smart strategy has always been far more effective than simply throwing sheer manpower at the front lines. Now let me take you back centuries, all the way to the year 1177. It was a time of crusades, kingdoms, and legendary leaders. But this isn't just any story. It's about one of the most remarkable underdog victories in history, led by a 16-year-old king who defied every expectation. At the time, King Baldwin IV of Jerusalem faced what seemed like an impossible challenge. At just 16 years old, Baldwin stood against Saladin, the Sultan of Egypt and Syria, whose reputation as a brilliant military leader and strategist was already well established. Saladin commanded a force of 26,000 men, while Baldwin's army consisted of a mere 375 knights and about 1,000 infantry. The odds were staggering. For most, this would have been unwinnable, but Baldwin wasn't like most. Born in 1161 as the son of King Amalric I of Jerusalem, Baldwin's early years seemed destined to follow the typical path of a nobleman. As the heir to the throne, he was expected to train in the arts of war, learning swordplay, horsemanship, and how to command troops in battle. But his path took a sharp turn when, at just 9 years old, Baldwin was diagnosed with leprosy. In the medieval world, leprosy was seen not just as a debilitating disease, but as a curse, isolating its sufferers both physically and socially. Baldwin's condition forced him to grow up differently from his peers. His body, slowly succumbing to the disease, couldn't endure the rigorous training other young nobles received. He couldn't spar with a sword or practice mounted combat like his father. and other knights. This physical isolation could easily have bred despair, but for Baldwin, it became an opportunity. Cut off from the typical education of a warrior prince, Baldwin turned inward, channeling his energy into intellectual pursuits. He immersed himself in the study of history, strategy, and the great battles of the past. From the dusty scrolls and tomes of his tutors, he learned about the triumphs of Alexander the Great, who had conquered vast empires with cunning and adaptability. He studied Julius Caesar, who turned seemingly insurmountable odds into victories through strategic brilliance. He examined the defensive tactics of Byzantine generals, who had mastered the art of fortifications and attrition in the face of larger forces. Baldwin didn't just read about these leaders, he analyzed their decisions. Why did Alexander strike when he did? What terrain did Caesar use to his advantage? How did the Byzantines hold off waves of invaders for centuries? These weren't just stories to Baldwin, they were lessons. Every campaign and every battle he studied became a building block in the young prince's growing arsenal of tactical knowledge. So when the time finally came, he applied that knowledge to the battlefield. In November 1177, Saladin launched an ambitious invasion, believing the kingdom of Jerusalem was vulnerable. Baldwin, facing Saladin's larger force, knew that an open field battle would be suicidal. Instead, he used his understanding of the terrain to bait Saladin into a narrow pass near Montgizard, where the Sultan's numerical advantage would be neutralized. Saladin's army, laden with loot and overconfident after its unchecked advance, was caught off guard. Baldwin personally led the charge. Despite his physical frailty, his presence on the battlefield inspired his troops, reminding them that even their leprous king was willing to fight and die for their cause. The Crusader Knights, bolstered by Baldwin's leadership, launched devastating charges, while the narrow pass created chaos in Saladin's ranks. The result was astonishing. Baldwin's outnumbered army routed Saladin's forces, turning what should have been a decisive Muslim victory into a humiliating defeat. Saladin himself barely escaped the battlefield with his life, a rare failure for a leader who had built a reputation as one of the greatest military minds of the medieval world. Baldwin's triumph at the Battle of Montgizard remains one of the most remarkable examples of how strategy, courage, and leadership can overcome seemingly insurmountable odds. He showed the world that even the greatest challenges can be overcome with the right mindset and plan. Today, Ukraine is writing its own version of this story. Just like Baldwin's outnumbered forces, Ukraine faces a formidable opponent with greater numbers and resources. Yet through strategic brilliance, innovative tactics, and a deep sense of purpose, they've managed to hold their ground and even achieve significant victories.
Before moving on, I want to mention that I'm tired of seeing ads everywhere I go. I mean, how many ads has YouTube shown on this video alone? And that's why we launched a newsletter a few years ago called Global Recaps. We've been sending daily news right to you with no ads. Yeah, that's right. We have sent 2,500 newsletters to date, but not one of them contained an ad. So, if you want global news with no ads and no censorship, this is the solution for you. Sign up now by scanning the QR code on the screen or the link in the description. Sign up today and become more knowledgeable about the world you live in.
North Korean soldiers are starting to show their true colors. It's becoming painfully clear that Vladimir Putin may already be regretting his decision to bring them into Russia. What initially seemed like a last-ditch effort to strengthen Russian forces has rapidly devolved into a series of blunders and disturbing incidents that are causing more harm than good. Reports first surfaced of North Korean soldiers betraying and even killing several Russian troops on the front lines. This was likely due to miscommunication and a lack of proper training. Since then, things have taken an even darker turn, and now it's becoming a pattern of behavior that is impossible to ignore. On January 5th, the Inform Napalm Intelligence Collective published a drone video from the Makhnovka region. The footage showed a couple of North Korean soldiers forcibly removing 2 elderly Russian civilians from their own home. What's worse is that the civilians were then forced to stand outside in freezing temperatures, completely exposed, while the soldiers used the house for cover to shield themselves from potential Ukrainian drone strikes. This is a new low. But for those familiar with the histories of these two regimes, it is not entirely surprising. Both governments have long been known for their oppressive practices, not just against their enemies, but also their own people. From the labor camps in North Korea to the documented abuses of Russian troops during wartime, Cruelty seems to be running in their blood. Before we dive deeper into these specifics, take a moment to hit the like button if you're finding this breakdown valuable. It helps us out tremendously in the algorithm. Take Mariupol, for example. In March 2022, the city's drama theater became a refuge for over 1,000 civilians desperate to escape the violence. Families, including many women, children, and the elderly, sought safety within its walls, hoping they'd be spared from the chaos outside. To make it unmistakably clear that this was a civilian shelter, the word children was painted in massive, bold letters on the ground outside, written in Russian. It was a plea for protection, a message to anyone who might target the area. But it wasn't enough. Or maybe the enemy just didn't care. Because on March 16th, a devastating airstrike hit the theater. The explosion was so massive it tore through the building, causing it to collapse almost entirely. People inside were crushed under the rubble or killed instantly. Some managed to crawl out, bruised and battered, but most never made it. Investigators later estimated that at least 600 people lost their lives in the attack. Others believe the true number could be even higher. This bombing in Mariupol is still one of the deadliest attacks on civilians during the war, but it wasn't an isolated act of violence. The Bucha massacre is another chilling example of Russian brutality, a moment that shocked the world to its core. You see, when Russian forces withdrew from the town of Bucha in late March 2022, they left behind a horrific scene. Ukrainian authorities discovered over 450 bodies scattered across the town. Many were civilians, and the condition of the bodies revealed unspeakable horrors. Some victims were found with their hands tied behind their backs, a clear sign of execution. Others showed signs of torture, including bruises, broken bones, and gunshot wounds at close range. Streets were littered with bodies, some left in the open as if to send a chilling message. Mass graves were discovered, with dozens of bodies hastily buried in shallow pits, evidence of an attempt to cover up the atrocities. Survivors told stories that were almost too horrific to comprehend. They described Russian soldiers targeting entire families, executing parents alongside their children. Women were reportedly sexually assaulted and then killed, their bodies discarded with no semblance of dignity. Witnesses recounted soldiers storming homes, dragging people out, and shooting them in front of neighbors. Even children were not spared. Some were murdered outright, while others were forced to watch their families die before being killed themselves. But the violence extended beyond physical harm. Survivors were left with deep psychological scars, living in terror every day, uncertain if they would be the next to die. The massacre was widely condemned as a war crime. Investigators documented the atrocities with photographs, videos, and survivor testimonies, creating a grim record of what happened in Bucha. Human rights organizations like Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch launched investigations, and forensic teams work to identify the dead and gather evidence of war crimes. It goes without saying that the international community was outraged, with world leaders calling for accountability. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky visited Bucha shortly after the massacre was revealed, calling it proof of genocide. The images and stories from Bucha became a symbol of the war's horrors, galvanizing support for Ukraine and pushing countries to impose tougher sanctions on Russia. But despite overwhelming evidence, including satellite imagery showing bodies lying in the streets for weeks during Russia's occupation, Russia has repeatedly denied responsibility. They claim the massacre was staged or fabricated, a terrible attempt to rewrite history in the face of undeniable facts. As of January 2023, over 18,000 civilians had been killed in this war, including at least 500 children. These numbers aren't just statistics. They represent lives taken intentionally, the result of deliberate and targeted strikes by Russian forces. Homes, schools, hospitals, and evacuation corridors have all been targeted, leaving no doubt about the intent behind these attacks. By 2024, the situation worsened. While exact figures are still being compiled, reports indicate a 30% increase in civilian casualties compared to the previous year. Heartbreakingly, more children were killed or injured in the first 9 months of 2024 than during the entirety of 2023. And even these numbers barely scratch the surface because many areas still remain under heavy fighting or occupation, making it impossible to document the true scale of the atrocities. But it's not just Ukrainians who are suffering. Russian civilians are being exploited too. The Kremlin has forcibly conscripted hundreds of thousands of men, many with no training, sending them to the front lines as cannon fodder. In the Russian army, human life is valued less than a Kalashnikov assault rifle. It is utterly disposable. A conscript's value is tied to the potential payment for his death, which is a significant expense for the Russian treasury. But even in life, a soldier has worth to corrupt commanders who exploit him through brutal methods. For instance, conscripts are often tortured or placed in makeshift punishment cells, like holes in the ground, and subjected to extortion. Commanders demand bribes to stop the abuse, knowing the soldier is desperate to escape the torment. Once they've extracted as much as they can, these men are sent on meat assaults to ensure there are no witnesses to the mistreatment. But the exploitation doesn't stop there. Many conscripts are deliberately listed as missing in action, even before assaults begin. This allows the Kremlin to avoid paying death benefits and keeps official casualty numbers artificially low. Families back home are left in the dark, with no closure, while the state avoids any financial obligation. Even for those who make it to the battlefield, survival is grim. A single soldier's brief 2-week existence in combat costs the Russian government 6 to 12 million rubles. This includes the payment for signing a contract, basic logistics, and salary. However, most soldiers never live long enough to collect their wages. To maintain the pace of their offensives and replace mounting losses, these recruits receive a maximum of 2 weeks of training, often much less. Many are sent into combat completely unprepared, equipped with outdated gear and with little understanding of the battlefield they're being thrown into. The result is a cycle of exploitation and death. So far, Russia has lost an estimated 730,000 troops in the conflict. Yet the offensive shows no signs of slowing down. Despite staggering losses, the Kremlin continues to push forward, seemingly indifferent to the human cost. According to Estonian analyst Artur Rehi, the average life expectancy of a newly recruited Russian soldier after signing a contract is shockingly short, just 2 weeks to a month. These poorly organized offensives inevitably result in thousands of deaths and casualties every single day. This is largely because the Russians continue launching attacks across multiple areas without clear plans, relying on relentless waves of soldiers. Similarly, North Koreans are facing grim odds on the battlefield, but for them, the situation is even worse than it is for Russian troops. Every single North Korean soldier sent to fight in Putin's war could be wiped out within weeks, as nearly 100 are being killed or wounded every day. The Institute for the Study of War, ISW, which has been closely monitoring developments since the invasion began in February 2022, released a damning report on January 16th. It stated that the entire North Korean contingent of 10,000 to 12,000 troops stationed in Kursk Oblast could be killed or maimed in just 12 weeks. That's only 3 months. Earlier this year, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky reported that 3,800 North Korean soldiers had already been killed or injured in the Kursk region. South Korea's National Intelligence Service offered a slightly lower estimate, putting the number at around 3,000. Meanwhile, U.S. officials reported that more than 1,000 North Korean troops were killed in just the final weeks of December 2023 alone. The ISW estimates that North Korean forces are suffering losses of roughly 92 troops a day. If this horrifying casualty rate continues, Kim Jong-un's entire contingent could be wiped out by mid-April. What's more concerning is that this high attrition rate is not due to strategic offensives, but the Kremlin's careless approach and stupid strategy of pushing wave after wave straight into the meat grinder. Ukraine provided further evidence of this grim reality when it intercepted a phone call between a Russian nurse in a Moscow hospital and her husband, a soldier stationed in Kharkiv. In the call, the nurse revealed that every day hundreds of injured North Korean soldiers are arriving at her hospital by train. Now imagine if hundreds of wounded are being sent back daily, then the number of those dying on the battlefield before evacuation must be significantly higher. The nurse went on to describe how the hospital had been ordered to dedicate entire floors exclusively for the treatment of North Korean soldiers. These sections were sealed off and no one other than the assigned staff was allowed access. Meanwhile, injured Russian soldiers were packed into overcrowded and understaffed wards, receiving far less attention. The disparity in treatment is stark, and the nurse suspected that once the North Korean soldiers were stabilized, they would be sent right back to the front lines to face almost certain death again. This cycle of injury, recovery, and redeployment is compounded by the horrifying tactics reported by Ukrainian forces. a Ukrainian colonel shared that North Korean troops are being forced to walk through booby-trapped fields as human mine detectors. They are sent in a single line, spaced only 3 to 4 meters apart. When one soldier steps on a mine and is blown up, medics move in to recover the body, while the rest of the line continues forward as if nothing had happened. This process repeats, turning each soldier into nothing more than a disposable tool for clearing the battlefield. It's important to note that these soldiers are not equipped with any specialized tools or training to deal with mines. They're just told to walk until they spot or hit a mine. Whereas, on the other hand, Ukraine's way of handling minefields is the complete opposite. They rely on trained deminers, specialized equipment, and careful coordination to navigate dangerous areas. To them, their soldiers' lives matter the most. In another shocking incident, approximately 24 men believed to be North Korean fighters were captured on drone footage as they were forced to jog toward enemy lines. But these soldiers made no effort to find cover as they crossed an icy field in full view of Ukrainian drones. The video shows some of them crouching briefly on the ground, while others jog almost carelessly. A Ukrainian veteran who reviewed the footage remarked that this scene was like a dream come true for mortar and machine gunner units. He noted that the attack was stopped quickly, though it remains unclear if all the men perished in the assault. Do you guys remember the ultimatum that was given to Wagner group militants, where they were forced to either push forward regardless of the risks or face execution? Now it seems like North Korean troops have been subjected to the same brutal orders. A diary was found on the body of a dead North Korean soldier. One line stood out: "Defending the homeland is a sacred duty of every citizen and the highest mission. I will join the front lines of this operation and sacrifice my life." This entry speaks volumes about the mindset of these troops. It provides a glimpse into their perspective and possibly explains why North Korean soldiers have been taking their own lives to avoid getting captured by Ukrainian forces. You see, after an intense battle with Russian forces this week, Ukrainian special forces were scouring dead bodies from the snowy western terrain of the Kursk region, where they discovered corpses of over a dozen North Korean enemy troops. Shockingly, one soldier was still alive, but when they tried to provide aid and ask him to surrender, the injured North Korean detonated a grenade, killing himself in the process. Fortunately, the Ukrainian forces escaped unharmed, but the incident left them visibly shaken. This incident is the latest documentation of the lengths the North Korean troops are willing to go to avoid capture and becoming prisoners of war, so that Ukraine can't present them as proof of Pyongyang and Moscow's blatant military alliance. Kim, a 32-year-old former North Korean soldier who defected to South Korea in 2022, shed light on this disturbing behavior. He revealed that North Korean soldiers deployed to fight in Ukraine have been thoroughly brainwashed to believe that sacrificing themselves for Kim Jong-un is the ultimate act of loyalty. According to Kim, soldiers are told that being captured is the ultimate betrayal. Becoming a prisoner of war is equated with treason, and soldiers are instructed to keep a final bullet or grenade to ensure they never fall into enemy hands. These claims have been corroborated by South Korean intelligence officials. Lee Seung-kwon, a member of South Korea's Parliamentary Intelligence Committee, confirmed that memos recovered from the bodies of dead North Korean soldiers explicitly instructed them to prioritize self-destruction over capture. These orders emphasize suicide as a means to protect both their country's secrets and the narrative of Pyongyang's denials. Similarly, John Kirby, the White House national security spokesman, revealed many North Korean soldiers are choosing to take their own lives because of fear of what would happen to their families back home if they were captured. For those who don't know this yet, under Kim's brutal regime, the concept of collective punishment is deeply ingrained. So if a soldier is captured or defected, their entire family, possibly even extending to 3 generations, could be sent to labor camps or executed. The regime also uses a guilt by association policy, punishing families for the perceived failings of one member. So they must be very, very careful in every action they take. But I guess it doesn't matter too much now because just recently, on January 14th, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky released a video showing 2 captured North Korean soldiers alive and in custody. We've previously covered this video in detail, so if you haven't seen the report yet, make sure to check it out. Did you know that while hundreds of North Korean soldiers are dying in action or taking their own lives to avoid capture, their generals are far from the front lines, enjoying the comfort of Putin's luxury resorts. According to intelligence sources, the North Korean troops fighting for Russia are commanded by generals Kim Yong-bok and Ri Chang-ho, both close associates of Kim Jong-un. However, these top military leaders are nowhere near the battlefield. Instead, they're reportedly staying in one of Putin's holiday homes, keeping such a low profile that even their own soldiers are unaware of their location. Kim Yong-bok is a prominent figure in North Korea's military hierarchy, a former Special Forces Division commander and chief of staff. He oversees North Korea's light infantry and special forces, which make up the majority of North Korean troops deployed in Russia's war effort. Given his age, analysts believe he may have participated in North Korea's overseas operations during the 1980s, potentially gaining experience that shaped his current role. Ri Chang-ho, on the other hand, is a senior intelligence chief, though much less is known about him. His specific responsibilities in the conflict remain unclear, but some reports suggest that he may be overseeing drone warfare operations. Despite the lack of detailed information about Ri, his position as one of the 6 generals reportedly sent to support Russia indicates his importance within the North Korean military structure. Both Kim Yong-bok and Ri Chang-ho are part of an elite circle in Pyongyang, often photographed alongside Kim Jong-un at public events. Michael Madden, founder of North Korea Leadership Watch, confirmed their involvement and identified them as the top 2 generals out of the 6 deployed to Russia by Kim Jong-un. I think it's safe to say these generals are just as useless and ineffective as their Russian counterparts. There's little value in discussing them. So let's shift the focus back to the North Korean soldiers themselves. Often, after Ukraine successfully repels a wave of attacks, they search the bodies of the fallen and sometimes recover forged IDs, documents, or notes. Some of these provide fascinating insights into the mindset of North Korean soldiers and their strange, often desperate tactics, if you can even call them tactics. For instance, one recovered note allegedly contained a detailed description of a bizarre strategy for countering Ukrainian UAVs, complete with stick figure illustrations. It's unclear whether this was an original North Korean idea or something taught by the Russians, but the tactic hinges on using live bait, like a human shield. The plan involves 3 individuals. One soldier acts as bait, standing stationary 7 meters or 23 feet from the drone. Meanwhile, 2 shooters position themselves 10 to 12 meters or 33 to 39 feet away. The idea is that the bait will draw the drone's attention and cause it to stop moving, giving the shooters a chance to target and destroy it. Additionally, the notes described breaking into smaller units to minimize casualties and pre-designating rally points for the group to regroup after scattering. On paper, this strategy may seem creative, but in reality, this strategy hasn't been that useful. The problem lies in the drones themselves. Ukrainian FPV drones are not simply flying machines targeting individual soldiers with bullets. At this point in the war, drones come in dozens, if not hundreds of variations. Some are equipped with automatic rifles, others with grenade launchers, RPG rounds, or even larger payloads of explosives. The chances of North Korean soldiers successfully shooting down a drone are slim, and even if they manage to, the explosive payload often remains a deadly factor. I mean, just think about it. There's loads of videos in which drones silently hover above soldiers and drop explosives with pinpoint accuracy. These attacks have been happening for 3 years now, and depending on the type of explosive used, the impact can destroy fortifications, underground bunkers, or entire squads. The blast radius can be devastating, and what's more, the drones are often undetected until it's too late. So clearly, this bait-and-shoot tactic is almost useless except in rare circumstances. But the situation becomes even worse when you consider the glaring weaknesses in Russia's drone defense infrastructure. The Russian military's anti-drone radio jammers often fail to work effectively, and their air defense systems are stretched thin across vast front lines. This creates opportunities for Ukraine to deploy an overwhelming number of drones, often in areas where they face minimal resistance. To put this into perspective, Ukraine is estimated to be sending approximately 100,000 explosive FPV drones toward Russian positions every month. These drones, often small and nimble, are around the size and speed of a bird. In theory, they could be countered by shotguns firing buckshot, which could take down an FPV drone much like shooting a duck in midair. But even this has its own problem. and that is Russian logistics. Russia's supply chain is arguably one of the worst for a nation claiming to be a global military power. Tanks are running out of fuel. Battalions are going without food, water, or ammunition, and basic equipment shortages plague their troops. It's no surprise, then, that adequate numbers of shotguns for drone defense are simply not reaching the front lines. While the Russian armed forces have issued some shotguns for this purpose, the supply is nowhere near enough to protect the thousands of soldiers on the battlefield. This has forced troops to resort to desperate measures. In one notable instance, a Russian soldier recorded a video pleading for help, not from his commanders or government, but from his friends. In the video, he begged, "Please help us with pump-action shotguns. Any shit will do." He went on to describe the horrifying reality they face, explaining how exploding drones wreak havoc, tearing soldiers apart in an instant. This desperation highlights just how hopeless Russian soldiers have become. Many have completely given up on the idea that Putin's regime will provide them with any meaningful support. As a last-ditch effort, some Russian units have resorted to training their troops to run in circles in an attempt to dodge incoming FPV drones. Ukrainian drone expert Serhiy Beskresnov shared a video online that captures this training, partially from the point of view of a drone. The footage shows soldiers awkwardly attempting to evade an incoming drone by running in circles. Beskresnov mocked the tactic, calling it a lesson for the great-grandsons of World War II soldiers who are now mastering the course of dodging Ukrainian FPVs. But as many Ukrainian drone operators have documented, even this technique is just as useless. Numerous videos show Russian troops attempting and failing to leap out of the way just moments before a drone's payload detonates. The harsh reality is that dodging doesn't work against an FPV drone, especially when it typically carries at least a pound of explosives. The speed, precision, and force of the drones leave almost no chance for soldiers to react in time. Despite the obvious ineffectiveness of these dodging tactics, Russian forces have passed the same absurd methods onto their North Korean allies. As a result, many North Korean soldiers have resorted to hiding in civilian homes in Makhnovka, hoping to evade detection. They likely assume they'll survive since Ukraine does not intentionally target civilian areas. But this strategy is far from a long-term solution, especially with Ukrainian forces closing in on the southern outskirts of Makhnovka. If Ukraine manages to secure full control of Makhnovka, they will cut off joint Russian and North Korean counteroffensive efforts by forcing them back across the river. This would provide Ukraine with a critical strategic advantage, allowing them to establish fortified positions and effectively prevent future attacks in the region. Recognizing the importance of this objective, Ukraine has been intensifying its efforts, deploying large numbers of drones to identify and target Russian and North Korean troops who remain fragmented and in hiding. When drone strikes fail to neutralize targets, Ukraine shifts to using armored vehicles with infantry squads to engage the enemy directly. Seeing there's no way out of this, the North Koreans resorted to using Russian civilians as human shields. While this tactic might buy them some time, it's unlikely to be effective for long, because Ukraine's expanding drone program is set to make conditions even worse for Russian and North Korean forces. On January 21st, the Ukrainian Cabinet of Ministers approved a major initiative proposed by the Defense Ministry to allocate UAH $2.5 billion or $68 million per month for drone procurement. This is a dramatic increase from December 2024, when UAH $1.1 billion or $30 million was allocated for combat units to purchase drones. Drones have already proven to be one of Ukraine's most impactful tools on the battlefield. This 150% budget increase promises to further amplify their effectiveness. Defense Minister Rustem Umerov stated that the initiative is based on lessons learned from Ukraine's successes so far. Unit commanders will now have greater flexibility to procure advanced drones tailored to their specific missions, ensuring a highly adaptable system for equipping troops with cutting-edge technology. On the other side, Russia's drone strategy still remains a mess, just as chaotic and ineffective as its ground operations. To fix this, the Russian Ministry of Defense, MOD, announced in August last year that it would create a centralized branch for unmanned systems. The idea is to reorganize informal drone detachments and centralize the development and procurement of drones under tighter state control. Part of this move seems aimed at bringing independent drone operators and developers under the MOD's command. Until now, some operators enjoyed a bit of freedom from the typical military bureaucracy, which allowed them to adapt quickly and innovate on the battlefield. But the MOD wants to change that. But another hidden agenda could be that they're trying to free up manpower by disbanding these informal drone units so they can redirect those soldiers into ground assault troops to keep their offensive going in Ukraine. The problem is that this centralized approach could make things worse. You see, allowing smaller units and independent battalions to operate more freely has been a major advantage in this war, especially for Ukraine. Ukrainian operators have thrived because they can experiment, adapt, and innovate quickly without being bogged down by top-down bureaucracy. That freedom has helped them develop creative ways to use drones and stay ahead in the constant race between drone tactics and electronic warfare (EW) systems. Russia's attempt to centralize its drone operations risks doing the opposite. It could slow down their already struggling innovation cycle by adding layers of bureaucracy and limiting the creativity of drone operators. Instead of helping their forces adapt, this restructuring might actually leave them less capable of keeping up with Ukraine's rapidly evolving drone tactics. Russian President Vladimir Putin indirectly confirmed the initiative to create a centralized branch for unmanned systems on November 28th. In his statement, he vaguely mentioned that the Russian Ministry of Defense, MOD, and the General Staff are considering the establishment of this new branch. He also named Defense Minister Andrei Belousov as the lead for this project. Putin described Belousov as a modern defense minister, citing his prior work on state projects related to drone production and financial support for drone manufacturers and trainers before his appointment as defense minister in May 2024. However, Belousov's leadership has been far from smooth and has faced significant criticism. Belousov's background as an economist, with no prior military experience, immediately raised eyebrows. Critics have questioned whether someone without a military background can effectively lead the armed forces, especially during an ongoing war. His appointment was seen as unconventional, and many remain skeptical of his ability to handle the demands of military operations. Adding to the doubts, reports suggest that Putin himself has limited Belousov's authority to make substantial changes within the military hierarchy, particularly in the General Staff. This suggests a lack of full trust in his leadership. Furthermore, dissatisfaction within the MOD and among Russia's pro-war community has only grown. Some have accused Belousov of failing to meet critical expectations and point to his leadership as a source of instability. Reports of purges within the MOD have worsened relationships with high-ranking officials, further weakening his position. Belousov's emphasis on the economic side of defense has also drawn criticism. While managing budgets and resources is important, critics argue that this focus cannot substitute for sound military strategy and battlefield effectiveness. His technocratic approach has been seen as overly focused on financial efficiency, often at the expense of operational needs. Allegations of corruption have added fuel to the fire. Sources claim that under Belousov's leadership, defense contracts have been awarded to companies with ties to political elites, leading to inflated budgets and suspicions of kickbacks. Financial mismanagement has reportedly plagued several defense projects, casting further doubt on his ability to lead Russia's military modernization efforts. Now imagine if Belousov were to take full control of Russia's unmanned systems operations. It's likely that, under his leadership, the program would deteriorate within months due to mismanagement, corruption, and a lack of effective strategy. And I guess we are slowly seeing signs of that. For example, Russia recently launched a massive overnight drone attack on Ukraine, deploying 131 UAVs, including Shaheds and decoys. Ukrainian air defenses intercepted 72 of these drones, while 59 failed to reach their targets. Although the strike caused damage to facilities, farm buildings, and private homes in the Poltava and Cherkasy oblasts, no casualties were reported. Ukrainian emergency services have already begun addressing the aftermath. At this point, it's like the Russians are deliberately trying to look like losers. Now the question is, can Russia turn things around in drone warfare, or is their strategy destined to fail under leaders like Belousov? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. North Korean fighter spirits are down, and they've finally turned to alcohol for comfort. On New Year's Eve, the troops dispatched by Pyongyang to support Russian forces in southern Russia were found drunk, according to Ukraine's GUR military intelligence. It's no surprise, really. After all, North Korean soldiers are in very desperate and dire situations, with their death toll rising quickly in the hundreds daily. The problem has worsened to the extent that a few days later, on January 13th, 3 North Korean soldiers reportedly killed 5 Russian soldiers and are now on the run. The Kremlin's war strategy is now crumbling from the inside, and in this video, we're going to look at why. Ukrainian intelligence has reported that the morale of the North Korean soldiers has fallen to the most pitiful levels. These men are constantly being flooded with Russian army propaganda about the great importance of the North Korean army's participation in the war against Ukraine. However, the treatment on the ground is vastly different. Now, the reason for the North Korean drunken escapade is not that hard to figure out: sadness and hopelessness. The sadness is largely because they are suffering in bad living conditions and experiencing huge losses on the battlefield, in a war they didn't even know they were signing up for. To date, it's estimated that the North Korean army has suffered 4,000 casualties, with 1,000 of those being fatal. All this in just 3 months. Now, wouldn't you drink too in that situation? To give you a greater appreciation of why these recent events are so significant, let me explain how we got here in the first place. Recently, it became known that the North Korean military was involved in Russia's war against Ukraine. According to various sources, there were between 10,000 and 12,000 North Korean troops sent to Russia, including elite units. These were deployed to support Russian operations, particularly in the Kursk region, where Ukraine previously carried out a successful counterattack. These troops operate disguised as Russian forces, highlighting Moscow's efforts to conceal Pyongyang's true role in the conflict. This involvement was the result of a military cooperation agreement concluded between Russia and North Korea in 2024. Russia and North Korea signed a mutual defense pact in June last year, and Pyongyang has also provided a significant number of missiles and munitions, as well as troops, to join Russia's war effort. Moscow has been trying to peel back Ukrainian control of a chunk of territory in Kursk for months after the start of Kyiv's surprise attack in August 2024. Because of that, Russian commanders sent their new North Korean soldiers to the front line in Kursk, including the village of Ulanok, southeast of the town of Sudzha. Kyiv claimed Sudzha in the first days of the offensive in August and still has control over the town, although it has lost its grip on territory elsewhere in Kursk. So North Korean soldiers were also deployed to Fana Sivka and Cherkasskaya Konopelka, just west of Ulanok. North Korean soldiers were involved in fighting in Kursk between December 31st and January 1st, but it was said that they sustained significant casualties. The figures hadn't yet come in at this point. Later, though, the Pentagon said it agreed with an earlier White House assessment that roughly 1,000 North Korean soldiers had been killed or injured in Kursk so far. Besides the Pentagon's assessment, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky had said on December 23rd that Pyongyang had already sustained 3,000 casualties in Kursk, but this number has since risen to 4,000. That means that of the 10,000 to 12,000 soldiers sent to join Russian forces on the war front, about 30 to 40% have already been fed as cannon fodder for Ukrainian forces. At this rate, it's not looking good at all for the rest of the North Korean forces. Before that, though, please like and share our content so that we stay in the algorithm. YouTube doesn't normally like such hard-hitting content, so this will help us keep delivering quality geopolitical content to you. In addition to that, Zelensky later said that Ukrainian forces had captured several North Korean soldiers, but they were seriously wounded and could not be resuscitated. So there it is. The reason why North Korean soldiers decided to get drunk on New Year's Eve, including those on active duty, can be linked to the fact they are sad and hopeless after literally being cast into the meat grinder as the casualty count rises to hit the thousands in such a short space of time. But you see, there's more to these losses than meets the eye. These men aren't just dying in their numbers because of sheer bad luck. It's been revealed that the North Korean soldiers have a lack of understanding of modern warfare and are being used by Russia in a manner leading to a high number of casualties. That statement from a South Korean politician came days after Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said Kyiv had captured 2 North Korean soldiers, releasing a video of the injured fighters being interrogated. It is these 2 soldiers who were captured by Ukrainian soldiers in Russia's Kursk Oblast earlier in January, who have given some much-needed insight into what the North Korean soldiers have been going through. The two have provided some important intelligence, though they have injuries including multiple wounds to the jaw, a fractured leg, and a bandaged right hand. The two soldiers include one 20-year-old rifleman and the other, a 26-year-old sniper. Before they got involved in this war, they belonged to the Reconnaissance General Bureau, the North Korean military's intelligence arm. Zelensky released on January 20th new footage of the interrogation of a North Korean soldier captured by the Ukrainian military. They are currently in the custody of the Security Service of Ukraine in Kyiv. One of the prisoners of war in the newly released footage said he arrived in Russia on a cargo ferry with over 100 soldiers. He was not trained with Russian military equipment, but claimed that several other North Korean soldiers were taught to do so. According to the prisoner of war, there were a few soldiers from North Korea who were trained to use heavy Russian equipment, but I personally did not undergo such training. The captured soldier also stated that within hours of deployment, he had already witnessed several of his friends and comrades die on the battlefield. Additionally, it was reported that the North Koreans were using dated tactics that go back nearly 70 years to the Korean War of the 1950s. These tactics are centered around attack or die type methods, something that the Ukrainian forces have greatly appreciated. North Korea's decades-long financial troubles, which have forced many soldiers to grow their own food or spend long hours deployed in construction and other work to sustain the national economy, could also have impacted the quality of training they receive at home. A heartbreaking example is that of the 100 North Korean soldiers who were sent to attack the left flank of the Ukrainian forces in the Kursk region. They were basically sent out into a death trap by Russia because they had zero cover, made no attempt to seek cover, and were dressed in green whilst crossing a snowy no man's land, meaning they also didn't have basic camouflage. Unsurprisingly, they were spotted in no time by a Ukrainian drone. Ukrainian military personnel said, "Seeing such a large group moving together was like a dream for our mortar and our machine gunners. I don't know if they all died, but let's say the attack was stopped pretty quickly." North Korean soldiers are using tactics that do not hold up against the new strategic and technologically advanced methods being used by their Ukrainian opponents. Both the Kremlin and their home government are not unaware of these facts. They both clearly don't care. More reports have come in stating that the Democratic People's Republic of Korea actually intends to send up to 100,000 more soldiers to Putin. Although these reports haven't been confirmed, and there is no sign of mobilization of such big figures, the Ukrainian army is still preparing itself in case such a thing happens. Mind you, all of this would take about 3 months for the mobilization and transporting of the full 100,000 fighters to the front lines to happen. Something which comes as a relief to Ukrainian forces, because according to Ukrainian Lieutenant General Serhiy Nayev, the Ukrainian armed forces could hold territory in the Kursk region for at least 1 month, and maybe longer, if they have enough resources. In the meantime, the video footage online shows the North Korean forces being easy targets for Ukrainian drones. If they do manage to send reinforcements, it would really just be more men tossed into the Russo-Ukraine war meat grinder, because they aren't well trained or equipped enough to engage in this war. It's not hard to see why, though. These men are far from home, fighting a war they didn't even know they were coming to join. Yes, you heard me correctly. According to one of the captured soldiers, they had no idea that they were coming to fight this war for Russia. The interrogator asked if he wished to voluntarily give truthful testimony about the circumstances of his participation in hostilities against Ukraine. The captive answered, "First of all, as I've already said, I didn't know before coming to Russia that I would be fighting here in Russia, and I didn't even know who we were fighting against." Another also said that his commanders had told him it was just training. He was not only in the dark about who he would be fighting against, he was in the dark about the entire war, a fact that shouldn't come as a surprise because when asked about what he knew about South Korea, he merely replied that he knew that it has fewer mountains than North Korea. That is the extent to which the Democratic People's Republic of Korea keeps its people in the dark. Now imagine being conscripted into the army at 17, then sent off to war you know nothing about, in a country you didn't even know existed, to fight a war you don't know of, and next to people who despise you but are more than happy to use you. It's no wonder that these men will drink themselves to a stupor at the slightest chance they get. But more, On this issue of fighting next to people who despise them, there has been a brewing animosity between the North Koreans and Russians at the battlefront. On January 13th, it came out that 3 North Korean soldiers killed 5 Russian Marines for reasons yet unknown. Their faces have been published and sent to neighboring communities, whilst they themselves are currently on the run from the battle raging on at Kursk. The leaflet published by the Kursk law enforcement authorities states that the 3 men are not Tuvans, as Russia likes to claim, but are indeed North Korean soldiers. The heavily armed men on the run are but the tip of the iceberg when it comes to rising tensions between the Russians and the North Korean men. The North Korean soldiers are at this point well aware that they were sent to fight alongside the Russian army as second-class actors and not as equals. This is true. Otherwise, how else would you explain the deciphered from a captured notebook of a North Korean soldier found killed in the Kursk? These notes showed that they received instructions from their Russian military commanders about how they should catch Ukrainian drones using live bait. This was all reported by the Special Operations Forces of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. The North Korean fighter, who we learned was in a Special Forces unit, wrote down tactics for shooting down UAVs and hiding from Ukrainian artillery. Most interestingly was the notes he wrote, visually depicting how this would be done. 3 of his fellow countrymen would be forced to strategically position themselves, with one of them being the actual bait, and the other 2 waiting to shoot at it at about 10 to 12 meters away. The way it works is that if the live target stops moving, the drone will also stop moving, at which point other soldiers will be expected to destroy the UAV. This type of war strategy shows that these soldiers are not being treated the same as the Russians they are warring against. These men were carried off to a foreign land to be used as drone bait for Putin's army. This is how little their lives are valued. Not only that, the resentment from the Russian soldiers also comes from how, simply put, they are unable to keep up. This is mostly due to the language barrier and their lack of exposure to modern warfare tactics and drills. When it comes to communication, these people were reportedly given only a week, in which they were taught mostly in Russian, to get updated on all the warfare tactics they needed to use and also to get familiar with the new terrain, commanders, fighting gear, and instructions. Right after that, they were deployed and sent off to what has become the death of many of them. The language barrier is also responsible for some of the chaos on the battlefield because North Korean soldiers can't communicate effectively with their Russian comrades, and they cannot interpret important directives fast enough or even at all. This all leaves them isolated from the rest of the troops and vulnerable to Ukrainian attacks, and leads to them also unintentionally exposing everyone else they're fighting with. Other Russian soldiers clearly think so because a captured Russian soldier described the North Korean troops as the ones who are not right in the head. According to Russian serviceman Vidya Chubrovich, who was captured by Ukrainian forces in Russia's Kursk region, North Korean fighters act independently without coordination. They launch their own drone without informing anyone or notifying their commanders, and then started shooting at it. They train separately and don't follow orders. The Koreans move forward, and we just secure the area behind them, Chubrovich said in a video released by Ukrainian defense forces operating in the Kursk direction. According to him, the Koreans never smile. They're harsh. There's nothing human about them. He said that, for instance, they shoot at everything, including drones, without checking if they're friendly or Ukrainian. They also move in tight groups of 5 to 10 people and avoid interaction with Russian troops. The captured soldier added that among Russian soldiers, opinions about the combat readiness of North Korean troops are mixed. Some say they're well-trained. Others think they're untrained and just reckless. They don't even know where they are. The Russians clearly have a low view of the people they are fighting with allegations of them just firing any weapon that is given to them. This obvious lack of unity is the reason why their forces are falling by the numbers and are also exposing the others. No wonder these guys hate each other. Yevgen Yarin, the spokesperson for the Ukrainian Military Intelligence Service, told sources that the involvement of the North Koreans in the fighting has not had a significant impact on the situation. It is not such a significant number of personnel. Yarin's remarks came about a week after South Korea's spy agency said that North Korean soldiers' inexperience in modern warfare was leading to mass casualties. To add to that, the South's National Intelligence Service has also said that North Korean troops are being consumed for frontline assaults in an unfamiliar battlefield environment of open fields. And they lack the ability to respond to drone attacks, and Russian troops were complaining about the North Koreans' ignorance of drones, calling them a burden. That's why the Russian audio that was intercepted by Ukrainian forces had Russian soldiers shouting expletives and cussing out the North Korean fighters, calling them the freaking Chinese. This wouldn't be the first time that North Korean fighters would be called derogatory names. They have also been called gooks by other fighters. To those unfamiliar, this is a racial slur used to degrade people of East and Southeast Asian descent that was used during World War II by US forces. Moreover, the North Korean forces are also likely demotivated by a classic case of homesickness. The idea of being sent off to a foreign land where you are forced to fight a war that has nothing to do with you is scary enough. But add to that the knowledge that there are higher chances of dying than coming out alive. And it's even worse. The knowledge that these soldiers have that they might never see their families again cannot be easy to take in. We got a glimpse into the mind of one North Korean soldier who wrote a letter that touched the hearts of many, showing how regardless of which side of the war you're on, we are all human at the end of the day. Dear Song Ji-myung, my closest comrade in arms, celebrating his birthday here on Russian land, away from our beloved Chosun, and the embrace of his affectionate father and mother. Read the crumpled letter, written in black ballpoint pen. North Koreans refer to their country as Chosun. I sincerely wish you good health and a happy birthday. According to the Ukrainian military, the name written on the soldier's identification card was Jong-un. It is believed that the letter was either not delivered or was a draft, as it was dated December 9th. Ukraine's Special Operations Forces released a photograph of the note, which was written in Korean. These are some of the deciphered entries from seized notebooks. Translations of other entries are in progress and more will be revealed, said the Ukrainian military. For context, this note was seen in the diary of the same man who wrote about how North Korean soldiers were being used as drone bait by Ukrainian forces. The senseless death of a man who only wanted to return to his beloved Chosun, but was instead killed, fighting in a war he knew nothing about. Unfortunately, defecting or seeking greener pastures is not an option for these soldiers. To start with, their own government is not too keen on receiving them. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said he was willing to hand over the soldiers to North Korea if the country's authoritarian leader, Kim Jong-un, would arrange for an exchange with Ukrainian prisoners of war in Russia. Of the two men captured, Zelensky said one of them wished to stay in Ukraine, while the other wanted to return to his country, which was consistent with interview videos released by his government. If Kim Jong-un even remembers these citizens of his and is capable of organizing an exchange for our warriors being held in Russia, we are ready to transfer such soldiers. Undoubtedly, there will be more POWs from North Korea. You would think that in light of such an offer, Kim Jong-un would jump at the chance to get back his people stranded in a foreign land. But to date, he has made no comments with regard to that. Radio silence. This is in stark comparison to the Kremlin, whose response was that they could not comment in any way, as they did not know what is true there through the spokesman Dmitry Peskov. We continue to discuss the possibility of exchanges, which is not easy work. But for us, the life of every Russian soldier is important. Clearly, the Russian soldiers at least have a government that will at least publicly show regard for them. Ethan Hee-Sok Shin, a legal analyst at Transitional Justice Working Group, a Seoul-based NGO, said it was unclear if North Korea will even claim the two captured soldiers as their own, given Moscow and Pyongyang's refusal to officially admit that North Korean forces have been deployed to Russia. At the same time, Russia could claim them as their own and hand them over to North Korea after they are traded with Ukrainian prisoners of war. In fact, there is more fear surrounding their return to North Korea rather than relief. The arrival in North Korea of two soldiers whose faces have been broadcast around the world. From a war in which the regime has not acknowledged its direct involvement could place the men and their families in danger as authorities seek to guarantee their silence. They could be questioned too over why they apparently failed to follow orders to avoid capture by blowing themselves up. Yes, North Korean soldiers are being told to blow themselves up instead of getting captured. Lee Seung-kwon also said, notably, memos found on deceased soldiers indicate that the North Korean authorities pressured them to commit suicide or self-detonate before capture. According to White House National Security Council spokesperson John Kirby, some North Korean soldiers have taken their own lives rather than surrendering to Ukrainian forces. These suicides, he said, were likely out of fear of reprisal against their families in North Korea in the event that they're captured. He also said that the exact number of North Korean soldiers who killed themselves to avoid capture is unclear, and that these troops are being treated as expendable and ordered by their leadership on hopeless assaults against Ukrainian defenses. The fact that these soldiers end up taking their own lives instead of allowing their families to face the consequences shows how tight the grip their authoritarian government has on them. To deflect and flee might mean freedom for the soldier in question, but it may also mean certain death, torture, or humiliation to their family back in North Korea. For the sake of keeping their relatives alive, they will choose to die before they are captured. To add to this, notable observations were made on how the soldiers were acting. It has been stated that these North Korean soldiers appear to be highly indoctrinated, pushing attacks even when it is clear that those attacks are futile. That means that while some might be doing this for the safety of their families, there are also those who have been brainwashed by the Kremlin's propaganda. For instance, the Seoul Spy Agency said one North Korean soldier, facing the threat of being captured by Ukrainian forces, shouted General Kim Jong-un and tried to detonate a hand grenade before he was shot and killed. Major General Vadim Skybitsky, the HUR's deputy chief, said that an iPad retrieved from a dead North Korean soldier contained 67 gigabytes of propaganda. My colleague looked at it. After 2 hours, he said, "North Korea is the best country in the world," the general explained. Now they are being loaded up with both North Korean propaganda as well as Russian propaganda. It's so bad that a legal analyst based in Seoul has said repatriating the North Korean soldiers against their own free will, despite the well-known risk of their punishment as traitors by a totalitarian dictatorship, goes against the humanitarian principle as well as Ukraine's claim of fighting in defense of freedom and democracy. These soldiers are safer in other countries and not their own. On the other hand, the South would have much to gain from receiving any defecting soldiers. They could provide intelligence about the nature of the North's involvement in the Ukraine war. Their transformation from elite soldiers serving the Kim dynasty to citizens of a free and democratic country would also be a major propaganda moment for Seoul. Unlike citizen defectors, who spend long periods planning their escape, it is unlikely that demoralized and defecting young soldiers captured in Ukraine would have ever considered living among their enemies south of the border. Now, though, making a new life in South Korea represents perhaps their best chance of survival. South Korean authorities say they are willing to discuss the matter with Ukrainian authorities if the soldiers eventually do ask to go to South Korea. About 34,000 North Koreans have defected to capitalist rival South Korea to avoid economic hardship and political suppression at home, mostly since the late 1990s. On a less positive note, however, Koo Byung-sam, spokesperson of South Korea's Unification Ministry, which handles inter-Korean affairs, said facilitating the asylum of the North Korean soldiers would require legal reviews, including on international law and consultations with related nations. "There's nothing we can say at the current stage," Koo said. This entire video has kind of been begging the question, though. What is it really that these troops are doing there in the first place? What's going on between Russia and North Korea that would drive Kim Jong-un to send his people on suicide missions, especially considering that he is on the verge of a population crisis in his country? Not only that, the totalitarian ruler also has more to worry about. There is a simple reason why North Korea has never before sent military units abroad. The regime is worried that soldiers from the isolated country might pick up incorrect ideas. They might, for example, start wondering why neighboring countries are far wealthier than North Korea, why nobody is obliged to serve for 7 or 8 years in the military, like in North Korea, or why goods considered luxuries in North Korea are freely available. Pyongyang fears that upon returning home, soldiers could decide that their true patriotic duty is armed insurrection. This sort of scenario is not a paranoid fantasy. Because in 1992, North Korea only just managed to head off a military coup organized by a group of officers who had studied in Moscow during perestroika. So why has North Korean leader Kim Jong-un decided to risk sending military units to Russia now? Despite the similarity of the anti-Western rhetoric peddled by Moscow and Pyongyang, the answer is unlikely to be ideology. Well, Kim Jong-un has always pursued a pragmatic foreign policy, and as they say, the devil is in the details. There are likely to be few short-term benefits for Pyongyang from sending troops. North Korea has already started receiving much-needed food, oil, and money from Russia as payment for supplies of ammunition. Of course, North Korea would like help developing nuclear weapons and aviation technology know-how. We know this because of the large number of North Korean delegations that visit Russian aviation institutes. For the moment, though, Moscow appears in no hurry to provide either of these capabilities. Instead, Kim Jong-un seems to see lending troops to Russia as a long-term investment. Ever since the Soviet Union stopped providing economic assistance in 1990, Pyongyang has sought to turn back the clock to the good old days of the Cold War, when it could count on a significant inflow of Soviet resources. Until now, North Korea has been unable to achieve this goal. But with troops now apparently deployed in Ukraine, it looks closer than ever. Pyongyang is cultivating closer relations with Moscow in the hope that the alliance between the two countries will endure even when the Kremlin no longer needs its help in Ukraine. North Korea is strengthening ties with Russia in a whole range of different areas, from trade, tourism, and exchanges to sending soldiers and workers to Russia. In trying to forge that relationship, things are already looking up for Pyongyang, because it seems Russia is warming up to them even on a more cultural level. I say this because North Korean soldiers will participate in Russia's Victory Day parade in Moscow on May 9th, marking the first such instance in history. Russian Defense Minister Andrei Belousov announced on January 15th that the military from 19 friendly countries have been invited to the Victory Day parade. It is reported that tens of North Korean personnel are expected to participate in the commemoration of the victory in World War II. Kremlin Foreign Policy Advisor Yuri Ushakov also signaled back in December of 2024 that North Korean troops might join the event. Additionally, a North Korean military band is reportedly set to perform at a music event in Moscow in late August, marking the first time North Korean military representatives will participate in such events in Russia. This is a huge statement that the Kremlin is making. They seem to be in this for the long haul. The fate of the 10,000 North Korean soldiers deployed in Russia is looking grim, and it's no exaggeration to say they might not last more than a few weeks. Why? Because some of them are reportedly fighting Ukrainian tanks with AK-47s. Yes, you heard that right. Bullets against heavily armored, multi-ton killing machines. It's not just absurd, it's downright suicidal. Here's the thing. Rifles like the AK-47 are iconic, reliable, and great for infantry combat. But when it comes to taking on modern tanks like Ukraine's T-72S or Leopard 2S, they're about as useful as throwing rocks at a battleship. The armor of these tanks is so thick that even high-caliber rounds bounce off, so you can imagine how much damage an AK-47 does. On the flip side, these tanks are armed to the teeth with high-explosive anti-tank rounds, machine guns, and advanced targeting systems. They can spot a target miles away and eliminate it before the enemy even knows what's coming. So when Russia sends soldiers armed with rifles to face them, they're not sending them into battle, they're sending them to their deaths. But it's not just the North Koreans being sent into these hopeless situations. Most of the soldiers fighting for Russia right now are facing similar problems. From poorly trained conscripts to prisoners pulled out of jails, the Russian military has made it painfully clear that it sees its troops as disposable. Adding North Korean soldiers into the mix hasn't fixed anything. In fact, it's made things worse. These soldiers are unfamiliar with modern warfare, can't communicate with their Russian counterparts, and frankly, seem to have been set up to fail. And here's where it gets worse for Russia. By bringing in North Korean soldiers, Putin has effectively internationalized the war. I mean, think about it. He's openly relying on foreign troops now. This move has only given Ukraine's allies more reason to step up their support. look at what's happened since these North Korean troops arrived. The United States finally gave Ukraine the green light to use ATACMS missiles. Then the UK and France followed suit, allowing Storm Shadow and Scalp missiles to be deployed deep into Russian territory. It's just been 2 months since Ukraine started using these weapons, and the results are already devastating. Russian fuel depots are on fire. Ammunition storage sites are blown to bits. Command centers are reduced to rubble. Ukraine is systematically dismantling Russia's military infrastructure, and there's no sign of them slowing down. At this point, you've got to wonder, what was Putin thinking? Invading Ukraine was his first colossal mistake, but bringing in North Korean soldiers might just be his second biggest mistake ever. They're not trained for this kind of warfare. Their tactics are outdated, and their presence has only exposed more cracks in Russia's already shaky foundation. So what does this all mean for the war? Well, we'll break it all down in this video. We'll cover the impact the North Koreans have had or haven't had, the staggering casualties they've suffered, and some of the more bizarre incidents that have unfolded since their deployment. We'll also take a closer look at how Putin's decision to align with Kim Jong-un has not only backfired, but also made the world a far more dangerous place. But before we dive in, do us a quick favor and hit that like button. It's a small gesture, but means a lot to us and the algorithm, so thank you for that. Now, let's get into it. First, let's look at what Russia has achieved with its North Korean reinforcements. In late November, Russian and North Korean forces launched a joint operation and managed to capture a few small but strategically important villages in eastern Ukraine. These included Tolstai Lug, Zeleny Shliak, and parts of Nizhny Klin. On the surface, it doesn't sound like much, but their location along key supply routes makes them significant. Controlling these villages gives Russia better access to logistical corridors that support their frontline troops. However, this operation wasn't quick, nor was it easy, because Ukrainian forces were ready. Let me tell you that the battle for those regions was nothing short of a bloodbath. Between November 20th and December 5th, Russia deployed over 4,000 troops, including several hundred North Korean soldiers, to the front lines. Ukrainian forces, equipped with advanced drones and precision artillery, inflicted heavy losses. By the end of the 2-week offensive, Ukrainian sources estimate that Russia had lost over 1,200 troops. Add to that dozens of lost armored vehicles and destroyed artillery systems, and you're left wondering if it was worth it at all. But even this small victory for Russia came with a catch. Ukrainian forces had already fortified their positions around neighboring regions like Verkhnaya, Korobne, and Krasny Kut, making it incredibly difficult for Russia to expand its gains or even hold on to the newly captured areas. Reports from Ukrainian intelligence and military observers indicate that Russian and North Korean forces have suffered a casualty rate exceeding 30 to 40% in these operations. That means for every 10 soldiers Russia and North Korea send into battle, at least 3 or 4 don't make it back. One of the reasons these battles have been so costly for Russia is Ukraine's superior use of drones and artillery. For instance, during the fight for Tolstai Lug, Ukrainian FPV drones targeted Russian supply lines and troop formations with devastating precision. Additionally, Ukrainian forces laid extensive minefields along key roads and routes leading to Zeleny Shliak. These mines forced Russian and North Korean units to abandon their armored vehicles and proceed on foot, making them easy targets for Ukrainian artillery. This is just one of the dozens of fights happening in the Kursk region alone. So when you step back and look at the broader situation, these minor victories don't amount to much. Russia might be using the North Koreans to plug gaps in their lines and mount offensives, but they're not gaining the kind of momentum they need to turn the tide of the war. So far, over these past few months, we've seen countless reports. Almost every week, a new update emerges about dozens, sometimes even hundreds, of North Korean soldiers dying in action. The numbers just keep piling up. According to South Korea's National Intelligence Service, approximately 3,000 North Korean soldiers have been killed or severely wounded since their deployment began. That's already a huge chunk of the estimated 10,000 to 12,000 North Koreans sent to fight alongside Russian forces. But it gets worse. Ukrainian President Zelensky estimates that the figure is even higher, closer to 4,000 casualties, which includes both killed and injured. More recently, the BBC Russian service reported on January 22nd that as of mid-January 2025, around 1,000 North Korean soldiers had died in Russia's Kursk Oblast. Now, that number only accounts for confirmed deaths. It doesn't even include the wounded or the missing, which likely pushes the total casualties into the thousands. If you add it all up, the overall number of casualties could be well over 5,000. That's nearly half of the North Korean deployment. You see, this kind of devastation is starting to have a real impact on the battlefield. In some areas, North Korean troops have pretty much disappeared from the front lines entirely, likely pulling back to lick their wounds after taking a serious beating. But here's the thing, despite these catastrophic losses, nothing seems to be changing on the Russian side. Instead of learning from their mistakes, adapting their strategies, or even properly training their reinforcements, Putin appears hell-bent on doubling down on the same broken strategies. It's like watching someone repeatedly try to force a square peg into a round hole, convinced it'll work if they just hit it hard enough. Now, even South Korean officials aren't holding back in their criticism. They're calling out the fact that North Korean troops are essentially being consumed in frontline assaults. And it's not just the experts saying this. Ukrainian soldiers on the ground are sharing firsthand accounts that highlight how dire the situation is for these troops. Take the front lines near Suicidal, for example. In this region, North Korean units are often sent in at night in small groups of 10 to 15 soldiers. They approach cautiously, entering villages from multiple directions in what's clearly an attempt at surprise. But it's not working. Even the Russians know this won't work, and yet they send the Koreans in. Why? Well, to absorb enemy fire. And when I say absorb, I mean it. Their primary purpose isn't to achieve any real objectives, it's to draw Ukrainian fire and take the bullets. Once they're down, Russian troops move into the positions they occupied, and only then does the real fight begin. And if that's not bad enough, Russian commanders seem equally incapable of learning from their mistakes. In a different battle, on or before January 18th, Russian air assault forces launched an attack on a Ukrainian garrison in Kursk Oblast. They sent 8 BMD infantry fighting vehicles along the exact same roads they'd been using since November. Yes, the same roads. Predictably, Ukrainian forces destroyed 4 of the 8 BMDs. At this point, you'll have to wonder, what are they expecting? Do they think Ukraine is going to let them through one day out of sheer pity? Even Russian military bloggers are starting to openly criticize their leadership. One blogger sarcastically referred to the commanders as geniuses for their stubbornness. Meanwhile, a Ukrainian Marine Corps drone operator, Kriegsforscher, described these attacks as embarrassingly easy to counter. According to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, the combined Russian-North Korean field army of 60,000 soldiers in Kursk has already suffered up to 35,000 casualties from trying to throw out the 20,000 Ukrainians in the oblast. Despite repeated efforts, Vladimir Putin's forces have made little progress. Putin himself has repeatedly pushed back deadlines for recapturing Kursk. Last fall, after multiple failures and heavy losses, the Kremlin extended the deadline to February 2024, only to abandon it later. At this rate, don't be surprised if Russia misses whatever new deadline they set, if they even bother setting one at all. It's the same story over and over again, sending poorly trained and under-equipped troops to random places, deploying human wave attacks into predictable Ukrainian traps, or unbelievably relying on North Korean soldiers with AK-47s to face off against heavily armored tanks. These aren't just mistakes, they're catastrophes waiting to happen. The truth is, neither the Russian nor North Korean troops were ever set up to succeed. They're being thrown into battle with odds stacked against them from the very beginning. For the North Koreans, it's even worse. Add in language barriers, complete inexperience, and a paralyzing fear of failure, and you've got a recipe for disaster. One glaring example of just how dysfunctional this alliance is happened on December 14th. Ukraine's military intelligence agency reported that a group of North Korean soldiers opened fire on vehicles carrying members of the Chechen Akhmat unit who were fighting for Russia. 8 Russian soldiers were killed in this friendly fire incident. Now, this could have been a case of miscommunication. North Korean troops likely couldn't understand orders or distinguish allies from enemies, or it could just be sheer incompetence. Either way, it's a devastating blow to Russian morale and a bitter pill for the Kremlin to swallow. And let's not pretend this is the first time something like this has happened. Russian soldiers have a history of turning on their own. There have been countless reports of Russian officers executing soldiers who tried to retreat from the front lines. Others have been shot for attempting to surrender to Ukrainian forces. In some cases, disobedience or even minor mistakes have led to summary executions. Plus, the North Koreans are now taking this absurdity to another level by committing suicide. You see, according to a description by Ukrainian soldiers, Ukrainian special forces were searching the bodies of more than a dozen dead North Korean enemy soldiers after a battle in Russia's snowy western region of Kursk. Among the bodies, they found one North Korean soldier still alive, but as they approached him, he detonated a grenade, killing himself in the process. Fortunately, the Ukrainian forces managed to escape without injury, but this tragic moment speaks volumes about the kind of mindset that's been drilled into these soldiers. According to reports from North Korean defectors, soldiers in their ranks are trained with the belief that being captured by the enemy is the ultimate form of betrayal. They're instructed to always carry a final bullet or grenade with them to ensure they never fall into enemy hands alive. This is a deeply ingrained mindset within the North Korean military, and it's confirmed by South Korean intelligence officials. Lee Seong-kwon, a member of South Korea's Parliamentary Intelligence Committee, corroborated that memos found with the bodies of dead North Korean soldiers showed explicit orders to choose self-destruction over being captured, emphasizing the importance of protecting their country's secrets and maintaining Pyongyang's narrative. John Kirby, a spokesperson for the White House, agreed on this matter. He revealed that many North Korean soldiers have taken their own lives out of fear of what would happen to their families if they were captured. It's this kind of trauma and terror that these soldiers are living under. Imagine being thrown into a foreign country, forced to fight in a war you didn't know you were signing up for, and then told that if you get captured, your family will pay the price. Given everything we've discussed, it's no surprise that the North Koreans have proven to be more of a liability than an asset to Russia. Their lack of training, inadequate equipment, and deep-rooted psychological fear and trauma make them almost useless in the field. It's clear that these soldiers have been sent to die. Nothing more, nothing less. And speaking of trauma, let's take a look at another grim and bizarre incident. This one happening before the North Koreans even entered the picture. So when Ukraine launched its counteroffensive and pushed into Kursk, Vladimir Putin reportedly gave his forces a hard deadline that was to recapture the region by October 1st. But as we've come to expect, that didn't happen. The Russians missed the deadline, and instead of regrouping and reconsidering their strategy, they continued throwing themselves at Ukrainian positions with the same ineffective tactics. During one of these failed attempts to push back Ukrainian forces, a brutal and chilling event unfolded. On the western edge of the Ukrainian salient, near the village of Leonidovo, Russian troops from the infamous 155th Naval Infantry Brigade managed to capture a team of Ukrainian drone operators. This might sound like a small victory on paper, but what followed turned it into something far more sinister. After overtaking the 9 Ukrainians, the Russians reportedly stripped them down to their underwear, forced them to lie face down on the ground, and executed them by shooting them in the head. All 9 were killed in cold blood, and as if that weren't enough, the same brigade allegedly decapitated 4 Ukrainian prisoners in a separate incident, placing their heads on pikes for display. Yes, pikes in the 21st century. It's hard to even process the sheer barbarity of these acts. Perhaps they believed this would send a message to the Ukrainians, a warning to back off or face the same fate. But here's the thing. It didn't work. If anything, it backfired spectacularly. Instead of demoralizing the Ukrainian forces, it had the opposite effect. These atrocities lit a fire in the hearts of Ukrainian soldiers, and they responded with cold, calculated vengeance. In the days that followed, a powerful Ukrainian force began hunting down and ambushing groups of 155th Naval Infantry Brigade Marines. And let's just say, they weren't in the mood to take prisoners. On October 18th, paratroopers from Ukraine's 95th Air Assault Brigade cornered a group of 155th Naval Infantry Brigade Armored Personnel Carriers, APCs, and tore them apart using drones, tanks, missiles, and mines. In this single engagement, they reportedly destroyed 3 APCs and killed 30 Russian Marines, and that was just the start. In the following week, Ukraine's 47th Mechanized Brigade, fresh from weeks of rest and retraining, launched a coordinated assault near Novoivanovka, just north of Zeleny Shliak. They fought in well-coordinated teams using M1 Abrams tanks and M2 Bradley fighting vehicles to unleash devastating firepower. Meanwhile, Ukrainian Marines rolled into Zeleny Shliak from the south in T-64 tanks and M113 APCs, blasting Russian positions and vehicles as they advanced. The assault didn't stop there. Ukrainian paratroopers attacked from the west, targeting Russian sappers laying mines on roads in and around Zeleny Shliak. In a single engagement, they killed 7 Russian engineers and cleared the area for further advances. The result of this relentless Ukrainian counteroffensive was nothing short of devastating for the 155th Naval Infantry Brigade. What remained after the smoke cleared was a literal graveyard, not just of Russian soldiers, but of loads of destroyed military equipment scattered across the main road through Zelený Shliak. By the end of October, analysts had documented losses estimated to be worth tens of millions of dollars. So when a heavily armored, highly experienced Russian brigade like the 155th Naval Infantry can be wiped out so decisively, what hope do the undertrained, poorly equipped North Koreans have? This brings us to the final question. Who's the real winner here? And how has Vladimir Putin's decision to align with Kim Jong-un not only backfired, but also made the world a far more dangerous place? Let's start with the first question. The answer, without a doubt, is Kim Jong-un. Sure, on the surface, it seems like a risky move. Sending thousands of North Korean soldiers and ammunition into a foreign war could backfire horribly for the regime. But when you dig deeper, the rewards far outweigh the risks. At least for Kim, it does. For one, North Korea is getting billions of dollars from Russia. This is a lifeline because North Korea's economy has been crumbling for years, hammered by international sanctions, mismanagement, and natural disasters. The money pouring in from Russia isn't just propping up the regime, it's funding the military programs that Kim uses to maintain his grip on power, whether it's paying off loyal elites, maintaining an oppressive surveillance state, or advancing its missile programs. This financial boost is crucial for the North Korean leadership. Then there's the strategic leverage. For decades, North Korea has been the weird kid that everyone avoids, largely ignored on the global stage, except when it conducts missile tests or threatens nuclear war. But now, by aligning with Russia, Kim has catapulted himself into a much more prominent position. Suddenly, he's not just the dictator of an isolated, impoverished state. He's a key player in a critical alliance that's challenging the Western-led world order. That kind of attention gives Kim the bargaining power he's craved for years. Russia is also providing massive amounts of food aid to North Korea because this is something that North Korea desperately needs. The country has been dealing with chronic food shortages for decades, but recent years have been particularly harsh. Floods, droughts, and sanctions have pushed millions of North Koreans to the brink of starvation. Russia, for its part, has already sent thousands of tons of wheat and corn to North Korea, with reports suggesting even larger shipments could be on the way. Now here's where it gets really troubling. This alliance is not just about money and food. Kim is also getting technology, and lots of it. Reports suggest that Russia is providing North Korea with advanced weapons technology, satellite technology, and possibly even nuclear technology. You see, it's no secret that North Korea has been trying to perfect its missile capabilities for years, especially intercontinental ballistic missiles, or ICBMs, that can reach the United States. With Russian expertise, they can significantly improve missile guidance systems, propulsion technology, and warhead designs. This means Kim's missiles are not just getting more numerous, they're getting more accurate and more deadly. Then there's satellite technology. North Korea's attempts at launching spy satellites have been laughable so far, with repeated failures and crude designs. But with Russian support, Kim could soon have real satellite reconnaissance capabilities. That means North Korea could monitor South Korea, Japan, and even US military activity in real time, giving it a whole new level of strategic insight. Perhaps one of the most overlooked is nuclear technology. While there's no direct evidence yet that Russia is sharing nuclear secrets with North Korea, the possibility can't be ruled out. Even indirect assistance, such as sharing materials, equipment, or scientific expertise, could accelerate North Korea's nuclear weapons program for a regime that's already one of the most provocative nuclear powers in the world. This is a terrifying prospect. And finally, there's the Comprehensive Strategic Partnership Treaty, signed by Russia and North Korea in 2024. This treaty isn't just a symbolic handshake, it's a bold declaration of their mutual commitment. Essentially, it's a mutual defense pact, stating that if either country comes under attack, the other is obligated to jump in and provide immediate military support. This solidifies their alliance in a way that's hard to ignore and sends a clear message to the world: we've got each other's backs. The most striking part of the treaty is Article 4, which lays out the mutual defense clause. If either Russia or North Korea is attacked, the other side must provide military assistance immediately. This clause has sent ripples across the international community, particularly in South Korea, which is watching this development with growing alarm. The implications are serious. Imagine a scenario where a conflict erupts on the Korean peninsula. Russia would now be contractually obligated to step in. The very idea of Russian troops getting directly involved in a Korean conflict is a nightmare for South Korea and its allies, fundamentally altering the strategic calculus in Northeast Asia. Then there's Article 3, which takes a slightly different approach. Instead of focusing on what happens if war breaks out, this clause outlines how Russia and North Korea will handle rising tensions during peacetime. Essentially, if either country feels that an invasion or serious threat is imminent, they'll begin consultations immediately to plan a coordinated response. This might sound straightforward, but it's actually a significant shift. Historically, North Korea has been notoriously unpredictable. During the Cold War, both China and the Soviet Union often found themselves frustrated by Pyongyang's reckless behavior. Kim's predecessors would make aggressive moves, such as missile tests or provocations along the demilitarized zone, without consulting their supposed allies. Inevitably, it was left to China or the USSR to clean up the diplomatic mess. With this treaty, Russia and North Korea are attempting to create a system that ensures better communication and coordinated decision-making. But there's a downside. By formalizing this kind of collaboration, Russia is now tying itself even closer to North Korea's decisions. If Kim Jong-un decides to act recklessly, Moscow might find itself dragged into a conflict it didn't plan for. Similarly, if Russia finds itself in trouble, say in Ukraine, North Korea could feel obligated to offer more support, even if it stretches their already limited resources. For South Korea, this growing partnership is nothing short of a nightmare scenario. The balance of power in Northeast Asia has always been delicately maintained, with South Korea leaning heavily on its alliance with the United States to deter North Korean aggression. But now, with Russia openly backing North Korea, the dynamic shifts in Kim's favor. I mean, think about it. If Kim perceives that his forces have made meaningful gains in places like Kursk, where North Korean soldiers are already fighting alongside Russian troops, he could see this as a validation of his military's effectiveness. That confidence could translate into bolder actions on the Korean peninsula. For instance, Kim might decide to test South Korea's defenses with more aggressive posturing or even limited military engagements. The Russia-North Korea alliance sets a dangerous precedent for other rogue states. By aligning with a major power like Russia, North Korea is essentially proving that international isolation can be overcome if you find the right partner. This could embolden countries like Iran to seek similar partnerships, further destabilizing global security. And now, to make matters worse, South Korea's military suspects that North Korea is preparing to send even more troops to fight alongside Russian forces. If true, this marks yet another escalation in an already precarious alliance, with ripple effects that could extend far beyond the battlefields of Ukraine. North Korea is about to become one of the most powerful nations in the world, making it an even bigger threat than it already is. It's all because of Vladimir Putin. The U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken announced that the United States believes that Russia is close to sharing advanced satellite technology with North Korea, with Russia losing badly against Ukraine and in desperate need of North Korean troops and ammunition. Kim Jong-un has begun leveraging his help. He is blackmailing Putin so that he receives advanced Russian satellite technology. As you might imagine, in the hands of the Rocket Man, such technology would be dangerous. No doubt the US and South Korea would be the first targets of his anger. Today, we'll explore how North Korea's unexpected support for Russia has paved the way for this high-stakes deal. The reward of satellite technology could be a significant leap in their military capabilities, enhancing everything from missile targeting to surveillance. Is Russia truly going to give up this technology? Is the United States and the rest of the world just going to sit idly by and watch as this unfolds? Let's dive into it. So before we get into how Putin has been blackmailed, let's kick things off by diving into what exactly advanced satellite technology is and why it's so important. It sounds super high-tech and maybe a bit intimidating, but it's essentially about putting these incredibly sophisticated machines into space that can do a whole lot of things. We're talking about satellites that can take detailed images of the Earth's surface, spy on military movements, communicate across vast distances, and even help navigate through GPS. These little wonders orbiting above us are packed with so much tech that they can change the way countries operate on a strategic level. That's exactly the kind of revolution that North Korea wants for itself. Fortunately for Pyongyang, Russia is pretty much a powerhouse when it comes to satellite technology. They've been in the game for a long time, with the Soviet Union launching the first ever artificial satellite back in 1957. That was a game changer and really put Russia on the map as a leader in space exploration. Fast forward to today, Russia has continued to advance its satellite capabilities, launching numerous satellites for various purposes, be it military, scientific, or commercial. Their expertise in this field is pretty much top-notch, something that Kim Jong-un has long since known and has been playing the long game for. We'll dive into the nitty-gritty details of his long game and blackmail in just a few minutes. For now, the big question is, why does all this satellite technology matter so much to North Korea? Well, to start with, North Korea, under the leadership of Kim Jong-un, has been aggressively pursuing missile and nuclear technologies for years now. This has obviously ruffled a lot of feathers globally, with many countries imposing sanctions and condemning their actions. President Trump in the past has even gone so far as to threaten to destroy North Korea for arming itself with nuclear weapons.
No nation on earth has an interest in seeing this band of criminals arm itself with nuclear weapons and missiles. The United States has great strength and patience, but if it is forced to defend itself or its allies, we will have no choice but to totally destroy North Korea. Rocket Man is on a suicide mission for himself and for his regime. The United States is ready, willing, and able, but hopefully this will not be necessary. That's what the United Nations is all about. That's what the United Nations is for. Let's see how they do.
However, having access to advanced satellite technology could be a real game changer for North Korea and its nuclear programs. Imagine the dark possibilities. They could have better intelligence on military movements in the region, more accurate targeting for their missile systems, and enhanced communication capabilities. It would essentially give them a significant strategic edge that would make them an even more formidable threat. Let's break down how this satellite technology could potentially enhance North Korea's capabilities. First off, reconnaissance. This is a big one. With advanced satellites, North Korea could monitor activities on the ground with incredible precision. They could keep an eye on military bases, troop movements, and even detect infrastructure changes. This kind of intel is invaluable, especially when it comes to planning and executing military operations. It's like having a set of eyes in the sky that can see almost everything. It goes without saying that South Korea would be a big victim of this. Next up, we have communication. Satellites play a crucial role in ensuring that communication channels remain open, even in the most challenging environments. For a country like North Korea, which has been heavily sanctioned and isolated, maintaining robust communication networks is vital. With advanced satellite technology, they could improve their internal communications, ensuring that their military and government can operate more efficiently. Plus, it would also allow them to intercept and potentially disrupt communications from other countries. That's a pretty powerful tool to have in their arsenal. Now, let's talk about missile targeting. This is where things get a bit more intense. Advanced satellite technology could significantly improve the accuracy of North Korea's missile systems. They could gather precise data on targets, calculate trajectories, and ensure that their missiles hit where they want them to. This kind of precision is crucial, especially when you consider the potential consequences of a missile strike. It's not just about having the firepower, it's about being able to use it effectively and accurately. Advanced satellites could provide North Korea with that capability. This is one point that the United States is very worried about, since it now means that North Korea can specifically target US cities with precision. In fact, towards the end of last year, North Korea bragged about its ability to be able to deploy missiles on US cities. But it's not just about the technology itself. It's also about the knowledge and expertise that comes with it. Russia's been in the satellite game for decades, and they've learned a lot along the way. Sure, North Korea could steal that info, but even if they could, they wouldn't be able to fully utilize it. Hence the path that Kim has taken to force Russia into helping. By partnering with Russia, North Korea could gain access to this wealth of knowledge and how specifically to use it. They could learn how to design, build, and operate their own satellites, reducing their dependence on other countries for technological support. This kind of self-sufficiency is incredibly valuable, especially for a country that's been as isolated as North Korea. At this rate, in a few short years, North Korea will be doing everything on their own, making them an even deadlier threat than they presently are. Pretty scary, right? In North Korean hands, we are looking at deadly and dangerous technology. With all this said, how is Kim blackmailing Putin exactly? Let's start by talking about the relationship between North Korea and Russia and how the two countries have been getting more and more militarily intertwined. Back in June last year, Putin and Kim Jong-un signed a big deal, the Comprehensive Strategic Partnership Treaty. This wasn't just a friendly agreement, it included a mutual defense clause. Much like NATO's Article 5, this pact was like a "you've got my back, I've got yours" kind of pact, but on a much bigger, scarier scale. This is what led to the deployment of 12,000 North Korean troops to Russia, along with ammunition, weapons, and rare air defense technology. It would not be a stretch to say that North Korea's involvement is what is helping keep Russia's war effort afloat. After all, Moscow has been taking quite the beating from Ukraine. At this point of the war, Russia has lost 828,470 troops. That's a shocking number, and it highlights why Russia needs North Korean troops. It wasn't a once-off deployment either. It's already been confirmed by the South Korean Joint Chiefs of Staff that North Korea is preparing to send even more troops to Russia to support its war. On top of that, North Korea is also expected to send Russia 150 short-range KN-23 ballistic missiles in 2025. Now that's a lot of support. On the surface, it might make you think that these two are super great partners, but the truth is that there are other factors at play. Initially, in exchange for receiving help, Putin promised to offer political help to North Korea. That means defending it on the world stage and helping it to navigate challenges imposed on it as a result of its isolation. These benefits later developed into the food trade, as Russia sent North Korea food supplies and grain in exchange for ammunition. Given that North Korea's economy has been heavily sanctioned by the international community, limiting its access to resources and markets, Russia's aid has been essential. However, this whole time, Kim's true goal was satellite technology. After putting himself into a position where Putin can't do without his military help, Kim has now started to make his demands. By leveraging his support and threatening to pull it back if he does not get what he wants, he has effectively backed Russia into a corner. As revealed by the US State Secretary, Russia is very close to giving in, and if it does that, it's game over. It's important to remember that this is a topic that's not just about two countries making a deal. It's about how this move could shake up the entire geopolitical landscape. First off, let's talk about the geopolitical tensions this could create. Imagine the ripple effects of North Korea suddenly having access to advanced satellite technology. It's like giving a naughty kid a new set of tools to play with, but in this case, these tools are incredibly powerful and can change the game entirely. Countries like South Korea and Japan are already on edge because of North Korea's missile tests and nuclear ambitions. Now, if North Korea gets its hands on advanced satellite technology, it could significantly enhance its military capabilities. This would undoubtedly raise the stakes in the region. Think about it. With better reconnaissance and communication capabilities, North Korea could monitor military activities in South Korea and Japan more effectively, more than it already does. This kind of intel is invaluable in any military strategy. It's like having a bird's eye view of your opponent's moves. And it's not just about gathering information, it's about using that information to plan and execute military operations with greater precision. This could lead to a more aggressive stance from North Korea, knowing that they have the technological edge to back them up. Given North Korea's aggressive stance against South Korea in the past and present, you can understand the dangers of having them gain that level of superiority. Now let's consider the security concerns. The potential for advanced satellite technology to improve North Korea's missile targeting is a huge deal. Accurate targeting means that North Korea could launch more precise strikes, which is a terrifying thought for any country within its missile range. This kind of capability could lead to a heightened sense of vulnerability among North Korea's neighbors. It's not just about the immediate threat of a missile strike. It's about the constant fear and uncertainty that comes with knowing your crazy neighbor has such advanced capabilities. This brings us to the potential for preemptive strikes. If countries like South Korea and Japan feel threatened by North Korea's enhanced capabilities, they might consider taking preemptive action to neutralize the threat. This could lead to a dangerous escalation of tensions in the region. Preemptive strikes are a risky move, and they can easily spiral out of control, leading to full-blown conflict. The stakes are incredibly high, and the potential for miscalculation is significant. One of the factors that makes preemptive strikes an even bolder reality is the fact that Pyongyang has been making some significant advancements in its missile and nuclear programs over the years. Despite international sanctions and diplomatic efforts to stop them, they've kept developing and testing various types of missiles and nuclear weapons. They've conducted 6 nuclear tests since 2006, with the latest one being in 2017. That test was particularly concerning because North Korea claimed it was a hydrogen bomb, which is much more powerful than their previous nuclear devices.
North Korea has conducted 6 nuclear tests, and this one just follows days after a missile launched over Japan. How significant is this latest test?
Well, this test is definitely a big deal. It's the first one to come on Donald Trump's watch. So it's going to be a real test to see how the president reacts to this. And nuclear tests are quite rare. They've only done 6 of them ever, and this is 6 over the last 11 years. But of course, the pace of them has picked up a lot, just like the pace of missile launches has picked up as well. And all of that is to send a message, which is North Korea is really serious about getting a nuclear-tipped long-range missile in its arsenal. And once it has that, every time it wants to threaten the U.S., it really can threaten the U.S. with potentially, taking out a big city like New York or Los Angeles.
On top of that, North Korea has been busy testing ballistic missiles. They've tested short-range, medium-range, and even intercontinental ballistic missiles. For instance, in April 2023, they tested the Hwasong-18, an intercontinental ballistic missile capable of reaching targets far from their borders. These tests show that North Korea can deliver nuclear warheads over long distances, which is a big threat to regional and global security. Now imagine if Russia truly goes on to share its satellite technology with North Korea. This would make an already bad situation unbearable. If North Korea uses missiles and nuclear weapons to threaten its neighbors, as is, what would happen if they had satellite technology backing those weapons up? It would be catastrophic. Kim Jong-un would definitely use satellite technology to further advance North Korea's missile development. Satellite launches often serve as a cover for testing ballistic missile technologies. So if North Korea had access to Russian satellite technology, they could refine their missile systems under the guise of space exploration. This would make it much harder for other nations to detect and counter these advancements, increasing the risk of a successful missile attack. So with all these issues at play, how will the world react when North Korea gets its hands on Russian satellite tech? Well, the United States and its allies are likely to respond strongly to any indication that Russia is sharing advanced satellite technology with North Korea. We're talking about increased sanctions, diplomatic pressure, and possibly even military actions. As we saw in an earlier clip, President Trump didn't hesitate to declare that America can and will, if pushed, destroy North Korea. The international community has been trying to stop North Korea's nuclear ambitions for years, and this kind of technological transfer would be seen as a major setback. It's not just about punishing North Korea, it's about sending a message to Russia that such actions will not be tolerated. The potential for increased sanctions is particularly significant. Both Russia and North Korea are already heavily sanctioned, but there's always room for more. Russia would know a bit about this given that they seem to be getting new sanctions every other day. Additional sanctions could further cripple their economies, making it even harder for them to sustain their military activities. North Korea, in particular, has been hit hard by U.S. sanctions, and it's definitely taking a toll on the country. Since 2006, the UN Security Council, the U.S. and other countries have passed numerous sanctions targeting North Korea's trade, financial transactions, and military activities. These sanctions have made it really tough for North Korea to engage in international trade and access global financial systems. They've frozen the assets of individuals and entities involved in North Korea's nuclear program and restricted scientific cooperation. On top of that, the sanctions have targeted North Korea's cyber activities, which they use to generate illegal revenue. Despite all these measures, though, North Korea has kept pushing forward with its nuclear and missile development. The sanctions haven't yet achieved their goal of denuclearization. Some critics argue that the sanctions have hurt ordinary North Korean families more than the elites, and have even emboldened the regime to continue its nuclear ambitions. It's a tough situation. On one hand, the sanctions have significantly impacted North Korea's economy and its ability to engage with the international community. But on the other hand, they haven't succeeded in changing the regime's behavior. North Korea continues to advance its missile and nuclear programs, posing a significant threat to regional and global security. This makes it a challenging issue for the international community to address. Diplomatic pressure is another tool that the international community can use. This could involve rallying other countries to condemn the actions of Russia and North Korea, isolating them further on the global stage. Diplomatic efforts could also include negotiations and dialogues aimed at de-escalating the situation. It's a complex and often slow process, but diplomacy is crucial in preventing conflicts and maintaining global stability. With Trump having taken office, this will be an interesting area to assess as we see how he navigates this relationship, given his history with Kim Jong-un. Now let's talk about the broader implications for global security. The potential transfer of advanced satellite technology from Russia to North Korea is not just a regional issue. It's a global one. The balance of power in the region could shift significantly, leading to a new arms race. Other countries in the region might feel compelled to upgrade their own military capabilities in response, leading to an escalation of tensions. This kind of arms race can be incredibly destabilizing and could make the region more volatile. The potential for a new arms race is particularly concerning. It's not just about North Korea and its immediate neighbors. It's about the broader implications for global security. An arms race can lead to increased military spending, diverting resources away from other critical areas like healthcare and education. This will result in the suffering of citizens. We're already seeing this in North Korea, where all the money goes to the Rocket Man's military. It can also lead to a more militarized world, where countries are constantly on edge, ready to respond to any perceived threat. This kind of environment is not conducive to peace and stability. And let's not forget about the potential for nuclear proliferation. Nuclear proliferation refers to the spread of nuclear weapons and the technology used to create them. This term usually pops up when we're talking about the increase in the number of countries that possess nuclear weapons, which can be pretty concerning for global security. North Korea's nuclear ambitions are well known, and the potential transfer of advanced satellite technology could enhance their nuclear capabilities. This could lead to increased efforts by other countries to develop their own nuclear arsenals, further destabilizing the region. Let's talk about this in practical examples. One of the most significant examples of nuclear proliferation is North Korea's relationship with Syria. Back in 2007, North Korea helped Syria build a nuclear reactor in the Deir ez-Zor region. This reactor was designed to produce plutonium, which could be used to make nuclear weapons. North Korea provided the technical expertise and materials to build the facility. Things got intense when Israeli intelligence discovered the reactor. In September 2007, Israel launched a secret airstrike known as Operation Orchard that destroyed the reactor before it could start operating. The international community was shocked by this revelation. It showed how North Korea was willing to share its nuclear technology with other countries, which could destabilize the region. This incident highlighted the dangers of nuclear proliferation and the risks of North Korea's nuclear ambitions. By giving nuclear technology to Syria, North Korea violated international rules and helped spread nuclear weapons capabilities in the Middle East. This case serves as a stark reminder of what can happen when nuclear proliferation is unchecked, and why international efforts to prevent it are so important. If North Korea continues to gain power, we might see a repeat of this scenario. You might think North Korea has lost its mind with these actions and potential outcomes. And while that might not be far off, it's important to note that blackmail and leveraging power have always been part of North Korea's playbook. The country has a long history of using its geopolitical position and strategic resources to apply influence and gain concessions from other countries. This strategy often involves providing support, making demands, and sometimes engaging in what can be seen as blackmail or one-sided deals. One notable example is North Korea's relationship with the Soviet Union during the Cold War. In the early years, North Korea heavily relied on Soviet aid for economic and military support. The Soviet Union provided weapons, technology, and financial assistance, which were crucial for North Korea's survival and military buildup. In return, North Korea pledged its loyalty to the communist bloc and aligned its policies with Soviet interests. However, this relationship wasn't always smooth. North Korea often demanded more aid and resources, threatening to align itself more closely with China if its demands were not met. By playing major powers against each other, North Korea managed to extract maximum benefits while maintaining a degree of autonomy. More recently, North Korea's interactions with China provide another example of leveraging support for strategic strategic gains. China has been North Korea's most significant ally and trading partner, providing essential economic and humanitarian assistance. In return, North Korea relies on Chinese diplomatic support in international forums. However, North Korea hasn't hesitated to exploit this relationship. For example, whenever China attempts to pressure North Korea into curbing its nuclear ambitions, North Korea responds with provocative actions like missile tests or nuclear detonations. These actions are designed to remind China of the potential instability in the region, using the threat of regional chaos to maintain leverage and secure continued support. Another key aspect of North Korea's strategy involves exporting labor. North Korea has sent thousands of workers to countries like Russia, China, and various Middle Eastern nations. These workers labor under harsh conditions, and a significant portion of their earnings is sent back to the North Korean government. This arrangement provides a valuable source of hard currency for the regime. In return for allowing these labor exports, North Korea demands favorable treatment, such as relaxed sanctions or economic aid. This practice has been widely criticized as exploitative, but it shows North Korea's ability to use its human resources as a bargaining chip in international negotiations. North Korea also has a history of making one-sided deals with South Korea. Over the years, the two Koreas have had many diplomatic talks and economic exchanges. North Korea often takes these opportunities to get economic aid and resources from the South by promising cooperation or peace. But here's the catch. These promises are often broken. Once North Korea gets the aid, they sometimes go back to hostile actions. Take the Sunshine Policy era in the early 2000s, for example. South Korea provided a lot of economic assistance to North Korea, hoping to improve relations. While there were some positive steps, North Korea continued its nuclear program and eventually backed out of agreements, leaving South Korea with very little to show for its efforts. Humanitarian aid is another area where North Korea has skillfully used international support to its advantage. The country has faced severe food shortages and economic hardships, leading international organizations and countries to provide humanitarian aid. However, North Korea has often used this aid as a tool in its diplomatic dealings. For instance, it has been accused of diverting food aid to its military and elite classes instead of giving it to the needy population. Additionally, North Korea sometimes stops cooperating with humanitarian organizations to pressure donor countries into providing more aid or making political concessions. This tactic shows how North Korea prioritizes regime stability over the welfare of its people while still getting benefits from the international community. North Korea's involvement in illegal activities also highlights its strategic manipulation on the global stage. The regime has been linked to various illegal enterprises, including drug trafficking, counterfeiting, and arms smuggling. These activities bring in significant revenue, which supports the regime's goals. North Korea has managed to keep these operations going despite international efforts to stop them, often using diplomatic channels and state resources to protect its activities. Sometimes, North Korea uses its unofficial networks to secretly support other countries or groups in exchange for political or economic benefits. In recent years, North Korea's cyber activities have become another tool for applying influence and gaining concessions. The regime has developed a sophisticated cyber warfare capability, which it uses to conduct cyber attacks, steal intellectual property, and extort money from foreign entities. High-profile attacks such as the 2014 Sony Pictures hack have shown how powerful North Korea's cyber capabilities are. These cyber operations not only bring in revenue, but also serve as a way to project power and deter adversaries. By showing off its cyber capabilities, North Korea can negotiate from a position of strength, using the threat of more attacks as leverage in international dealings. North Korea's nuclear program is perhaps the best example of its ability to create one-sided deals and extract concessions. The regime's pursuit of nuclear weapons is central to its national defense strategy, serving both as a deterrent and a bargaining chip. North Korea has a pattern of taking provocative actions, entering diplomatic negotiations and agreements, and then later backing out of its commitments. This cycle has allowed North Korea to secure economic aid, sanctions relief, and other concessions while continuing to advance its nuclear capabilities. The regime's mastery of bluffs has kept the international community on edge, ensuring that North Korea remains a focal point in global security discussions. It's also starting to seem like Putin and his officials are losing their step, because as much as North Korea has come for the whole pie, other nations have been leveraging their influence on Putin for various things as well. Let's dive into how some countries have helped Russia, only to make significant demands in return, often creating one-sided deals. First up, we have Belarus. Belarus and Russia have been tight allies for a while now. Since the beginning of the Ukraine conflict, Belarus has played an essential role by allowing Russian troops to use its territory and airspace for military operations. This wasn't a small favor, as it put Belarus in NATO's crosshairs. In return, Belarus has demanded substantial economic and military support from Russia. We're talking about loans, energy supplies, and military equipment. It's a give and take, but Belarus's demands have been quite hefty, and Russia has had to comply to keep this ally happy and close. Then there's Iran. Iran has provided Russia with drones and other military equipment to support its efforts in Ukraine. But this support hasn't come free. Iran has made some significant demands in return, seeking economic concessions and political support from Russia. For instance, Russia has become more lenient in its dealings with Iran, easing some sanctions and providing economic aid. This January, the two nations even signed a comprehensive strategic partnership treaty. This relationship has allowed Iran to strengthen its military capabilities while benefiting economically from Russia's support. Drawing a parallel to the current situation with North Korea, it's evident that North Korea's support for Russia in the Russo-Ukrainian war has been crucial. But with all this help, how has Russia been faring in a war it started? Well, the truth is that Russia has been facing some pretty serious challenges in its war against Ukraine. Despite their best efforts, Russian forces have struggled to make significant progress. Ukrainian forces have been putting up a strong defense and even launching successful counterattacks. For instance, Ukraine's recent drone strikes against Russian defense industrial enterprises and oil refineries have significantly degraded Russia's military capacity. These strikes haven't just had a psychological impact, they've also had serious military consequences, disrupting Russia's ability to sustain its war efforts. Ukraine has also been targeting Russian ammunition depots, air bases, and military industry facilities. These strategic strikes have caused massive explosions, sometimes even resulting in small earthquakes. This has further strained Russia's ability to field modern weapons on the front lines. It's been reported by the Oryx project that the Russian military has lost at least 20,027 units of equipment since the beginning of its full-scale invasion of Ukraine. The majority of these losses, 15,051 units, were destroyed, while 852 were reported as damaged. In various retreats, Russian troops abandoned 1,113 units, and over 3,000 were captured by Ukrainian forces. It's no wonder that the Russians have now defaulted to outdated and old equipment, which, as you might have guessed, is less effective in combat. Ukraine hasn't just been giving the Russians any room to breathe. They've been keeping up the pressure on Russian forces all along the battle lines. The Ukrainian forces have struck several Russian command and control posts behind the lines, aiming to degrade Russia's ability to conduct military operations. This has impacted Russia's logistics and operational planning, making it harder for them to sustain their offensive. Moreover, Ukraine launched an offensive in Russia's Kursk region, seizing over 20 settlements, including the town of Sudzha. This move forced Russia to dedicate more than 50,000 troops to counter the Ukrainian presence in the region, diverting resources that could have been used elsewhere. Despite Russian and North Korean attacks, Ukrainian forces have managed to maintain control of the area, which includes dozens of settlements. Ukraine's deep strikes have also weakened Russia's war production capabilities. Ukrainian attacks on Russian oil refineries and war production facilities have been increasingly successful, further hampering Russia's ability to sustain its military efforts. This has put additional pressure on Russia, making it harder for them to continue their offensive. What makes this situation even more infuriating for Moscow is that despite North Korea's support, there hasn't been a significant difference in the outcome of the war for Russia. North Korean troops are facing heavy casualties, with 4,000 casualties already suffered among the North Koreans in the last 3 months alone. This is primarily due to their lack of combat experience and unfamiliarity with the flat plains of the battlefield. Drone and artillery strikes have made them easy targets as Ukrainian forces have continued to mow them down. Despite the lack of tangible progress, Kim Jong-un still wants that satellite technology, and by all accounts, he looks like he will be getting his way. All we can do is wait and see if the US will be able to stop him under President Trump, or if this is truly the beginning of the end for peace as we know it.